dia a todos. Vamos dar início a esse evento. Depois farei toda uma explicação em inglês também do que é esse evento. É um evento internacional, né? Um evento que trata do direito concorrencial, um evento organizado pelo Grupo de Estudo de Direito da Concorrência do Mackenzie, juntamente com a ASCOLA Brasil, Academic Society for Competition Law, em parceria com a Universidade de São Paulo, USP de Ribeirão Preto e o IBRAC. Depois trarei mais detalhes desse evento também. Para iniciar, eu gostaria de chamar aqui a professora Juliana Oliveira Domingues, da Universidade de São Paulo, professor Marco Antônio Loschiavo de Barros, do Mackenzie, e o doutor René Medrado, representando o IBRAC. E também chamo, para que junte-se a nós, please, o professor Bruce Wardhaugh, da Durham University. O Mackenzie é uma universidade confessional e todos os nossos eventos oficiais iniciam com uma devocional. Então, eu convido o pastor Vicente para que faça a devocional para o nosso dia. Obrigado.
Bom dia, meus queridos amigos. É muito bom estar aqui. É sempre muito bom abrir os eventos com essa oportunidade que nós temos de refletir acerca de questões que dizem respeito ao nosso cotidiano e que estão naquilo que diz também parte da identidade institucional do Mackenzie, que é a nossa confessionalidade. Alguém uma vez afirmou o seguinte: eu gosto do impossível, porque lá a concorrência é menor. Eu gosto do impossível, porque lá a concorrência é menor. Quem afirmou isso foi um grande empresário, um visionário, alguém que foi questionado, inclusive, pelas suas grandes ideias. O seu nome é Walt Disney. Ele certa vez disse essa frase, isso marcou a história dele, e isso marcou também a nossa história. Às vezes a gente se esquece que concorrência, de fato, é algo que faz parte do nosso cotidiano e precisa ser tratado com o devido cuidado. Eu trago aqui para vocês um texto do profeta Oséias que fala da concorrência. Esse também é um tema das Escrituras. Lá a concorrência tinha um aspecto interessante, porque às vezes as pessoas eram desleais e não faziam a concorrência da maneira correta. E a maneira como faziam isso é que as suas balanças não eram honestas. Eu gostaria que você prestasse muita atenção no que o texto diz, porque ele pode ser um alerta para todos nós. A concorrência desleal tem um fim bem ruim e precisamos estar atentos para não cair nos seus erros. Diz assim o texto: os israelitas são como os cananeus, as pessoas são todas iguais. São desonestos e usam balanças falsas para explorar os outros. Eles dizem: é verdade que somos ricos, mas ninguém pode nos acusar de termos ajuntado a nossa riqueza por meios desonestos. Porém, eu, o Senhor, sou o Deus de vocês, desde que os tirei do Egito, e farei com que vocês voltem a morar em barracas, como moraram quando eu me encontrei com vocês no deserto. Um alerta para todos nós. Balanças desleais, concorrência desleal. Parece que o universo conspira contra. Parece que as pessoas são pegas por acaso. Nada de acaso nisso. Existe alguém governando todas as coisas. Seu nome é Deus. E Ele tudo vê. E Ele sabe quando as balanças são desonestas. Deus abençoe a sua vida. E você pratique aquilo que é certo, da maneira certa, porque isso é bom e agradável. Minha oração por vocês é para que vocês tenham um grande evento nesta manhã. E muito obrigado pela oportunidade. Sejam todos muito bem-vindos nesta manhã. E eu espero que, de fato, o Mackenzie, com a sua visão cristã de mundo, com os seus valores, os seus ideais, a sua identidade, contribua para uma concorrência justa, com temor e tremor diante de Deus. Obrigado e até a próxima oportunidade, quando Deus permitir. Até logo. Obrigado.
A few months ago, well, first of all, welcome to Mackenzie, and for those that who are watching us in YouTube, you are very welcome too. Some few months ago, Professor Marco Moschiavo came up to me and said that a professor from UK was coming to Mackenzie, and he's a competition law professor. And we thought, wow, it's perfect. So let's invite him to teach for our PhD and LLM and master students in a class. And then we realized that the professor that was coming to Mackenzie was Bruce Wardhaugh. Then we thought, it's not fair only the PhD and the LLM students have this chance. So let's open to the undergraduate students also. But at that time, I was talking with Professor Juliana Domingues, that is co-chair of ASCOLA and professor of USP. And we was planning to have a kind of ASCOLA conference, ASCOLA lecture here at Mackenzie. And for coincidence, I received a call from IBRAC, that's today represented by René Medrado, its vice president, telling that IBRAC was organizing a week to promote competition law at universities, in different universities. Join 2 universities in each conference. And of course, I can say that Mackenzie and USP RIBEIRÁO with Professor Juliana, we are already partners. And then we thought, why don't you do a big event? A big event with ASCOLA, Brazil, Mackenzie, USP, Ribeirão Preto, and IBRAC, all together to receive Professor Bruce Wardhaugh. And I'm truly honored, Professor Bruce, to have you here with us. I invite you to give your lecture, and I recommend to all students and academics to read your most recent book. It's really amazing. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first time in South America and my first time in Brazil. And I can just say it's just been wonderful. I arrived on Saturday. It's just been wonderful 6 days so far. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for your hospitality, concern, and effort you've shown with it. I really appreciate that. I'm Bruce Wardhaugh. I'm a competition law professor at the University of Durham in England. I realize I'm speaking in English, for which I apologize. I do more the language of my hosts, but unfortunately there's a monolingual tradition among Anglophones. If I speak too fast or you just don't, something is just not clear, please feel free to raise your hand and interrupt. I'm very much used to that in the class. I do have a tendency to speak rather rapidly, so just alert me if that becomes problematic. Okay. Today's talk is really based upon a book that was published this autumn by Cambridge University Press. This was in effect my lockdown baby. I had nothing to do. I don't watch TV, so I decided I'm going to write a book, which was fine. I had in England we were more or less under house arrest, and I couldn't leave the house for more than an hour a day. So writing a book sort of made up for it. And the book actually started ironically as I was thinking before all of the COVID broke out about working on competition and sustainability. And in fact, at the last event that I participated in prior to the lockdown, it was a reception given by one of the legal academic societies academic legal societies in the UK. I spoke with an acquisitions editor at Cambridge University Press and on it. They were interested, and then 10 days later we went into lockdown. So the focus of my thoughts and the focus of my book changed. And it became a much more general book looking at competition in crises because we've had a series of crises recently. In fact, we get new crises every day, and the English word unprecedented to describe each new crisis seems to be overused. So this book really looks at the typical view, and we saw this view, at least I saw this view in the UK, and I think it was a view that was prominent throughout the world during the early stages of COVID, was that competition law tends to get in the way of firms' ability to effectively mitigate or somehow deal with crisis. And you see here industries saying this all the time. And their argument is just leave us alone, suspend the operation of competition law, and we'll figure it out and we'll solve it for you. Okay, now a very clear case for this was in England, the UK. I don't know what was happening here, but in the UK during the early stages of COVID, people got kind of weird and started panic buying toilet paper. And stripping the shelves of the supermarket of toilet paper. You can see, in fact, that to the extent that they had to put a quota on the amount of toilet paper you could buy in the supermarkets. And so this caused a bit of a problem, a panic, and in our financial newspaper, the Financial Times, there was an article reporting that the relaxation of competition rules would help suppliers coordinate, say, the supply of toilet paper, which was in the forefront of everybody's minds at that time. And so they could have people from Tesco and Sainsbury's, those are two of the four largest grocery chains in the UK, sit around and talk about toilet paper production, supply, and distribution without fear of prosecution. Is that really a good thing? I don't think so, and I will show you why I don't think so. But it also, relaxation of competition rules also extended to the sphere of not just toilet paper and talking about toilet paper and other groceries, but also to mergers. We had here a few months later a comment about a blocked merger by our competition authorities. A block merger of two of the largest sportswear chains in the UK that sold trainers and tennis shoes. In fact, we had one player on the market, and the chairman of one of the companies said that blocking of the merger is absurd given economic conditions caused by COVID. But this was not just a COVID issue. We see the claims being made in very prominently in sustainability concerns. The competition law is blocking effective means of resolving sustainability issues. We need to relax competition law so these environmental problems can be better solved. My argument also applies to this. I think that this is the wrong way to deal with the issues. And it's the wrong way, and I think I will address it briefly from a theoretical perspective. But also history shows us that every time that competition has been relaxed in the face of the so-called crisis, the crisis isn't solved and further problems tend to result from this. So, in fact, often the relaxation, so-called relaxation or suspension of competition rules increases or aggravates the problem. I have a brief outline here. I'll look at the purpose and structure of competition law. My focus is primarily on the European regime. That was the regime I was working with. I think the claims are generally applicable. The cases are, with one exception, one big exception, are from Europe. So I'll introduce those and we'll talk about that. So here's the theoretical argument. The theoretical argument is quite simple. What is the purpose of competition law and competition rules? Essentially, the market is the way society grows wealth. Okay, and so that's the premise of orthodox microeconomics, and it's the starting point, I think, for any investigation. And principles of orthodox price theory show that in competitive markets, actions of all involved lead to sort of wealth transfers of goods and services and money, which lead to a wealth maximizing and optimal distribution. Okay, we learned that in the first couple of weeks of basic macroeconomics, what we taught in high school and university. But unfortunately, perfect competition is never exists. It's like Plato's Form. Okay, it never really exists, and there's always these how should we say design flaws in the market called or bugs in the market called market failures. And the big market failures tend to prevent this so-called invisible hand to direct the wealth optimization. And the purpose of competition law is to address one of these market failures, and that's the market failure caused by monopoly. I mean, this is all simple. I mean, you're all competition experts. I'm sorry, I'm preaching to the converted. And we see the monopoly problem manifesting itself in three ways: collusion, monopolies, and merger. And competition rules in the national legal order address these problems. And we do this in the EU with Article 101, Article 102, and through merger regulations. So if the purpose of competition law is to eliminate the market failure associated with monopoly, okay, this is the purpose, and it aids in a more effective, better wealth maximizing distribution of goods, services. But now if you suggest that you relax competition, the competition rules in the face of a crisis, you are in effect suggesting that more monopoly in the market will solve the problem. Okay, and that seems to be prima facie, or at least more than prima facie, absurd, right? Okay, so the causes of these crises, you're in effect saying, are caused by too much competition, or otherwise put, too little monopoly. Think of it. But if you look at all of these crises, none of them are caused by too little monopoly. Okay? There's always some other shock or some other cause other than too little monopoly that's in the soup that causes this nasty crisis. Typically, it's unexpected drops or increases in demand, so-called shocks, or other forms of market failure, particularly in the environment problem. Externalities are an issue, or the market failures caused by public and quasi-public goods, inefficient ability to or insufficient ability to, in effect, privatize the outcome. Now, if we really want I think the strongest evidence for all of this historically comes from America during the Great Depression. Okay, between the First and Second World Wars. Now, we know there's little consensus in the economic history literature regarding the causes of the Great Depression. The usual suspects involve things like banking runs, panics, when people see a lineup, not knowing the difference between an insolvent bank and an illiquid bank. Costly credit intermediation. There was a lot of, before the Great Depression, credit, at least in the US, was quite easy to come by. When things tightened up, of course, that froze the credit markets. And thus smaller businesses and individuals had less access to credit, drop in demand, so on and so forth. And of course, the major suspect, this is the Milton Friedman suspect, is monetary policy linking the US dollar to the gold standard. Okay, and they didn't have policies. But whatever the causes were, and we really don't need to go into that, I can say two things. None of them was caused by too little monopoly, and the effects were quite clear. During the Great Depression, there was an obvious, profound drop in demand across the economy for almost every good and service. This became a problem in the election of 1932. The then President Herbert Hoover, he was an engineer by profession. He looked for technocratic solutions, couldn't find any. People were fed up with him and voted Franklin Roosevelt into power. He took over in January of 1933. And Roosevelt brought in the New Deal. In fact, there were two New Deals. The cornerstone of the first New Deal was brought in Roosevelt's first 100 days. It was the National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933. Now, the National Industrial Recovery Act, in effect, repealed Section 1 of the Sherman Act. Section 1 of the Sherman Act being the anti-cartels provision. Okay? It allowed industries to develop codes of fair competition, and upon approval by the president or its delegates, these codes will be the standards of fair competition for trade and industry, or for that industry. Violation of the code would be a criminal offense. The aim of this act was to ensure that the benefits of fair competition would flow to the employees, and it required that codes include provisions for unionization and minimum wages. So it was an idea to send money to workers through restricting competition. And essentially the codes, various industries were coded. These included arrangements that limited competition, including minimum prices. This was, remember, 1911. So this was 21 years roughly after the Dr. Miles decision, which in the US said that minimum prices is a hardcore cartel. So legislatively repealed that. Restrictions on production, investment in plant and equipment, and work week. All of those are hardcore cartels, all of them. So this is perfectly legal, and in fact, it's not just perfectly legal, it's, if the industry adopts it, it's criminal for you to go against it. Resale price maintenance, again, a hardcore cartel. Base point pricing, open price systems, in other words, transparency in the prices. Minimum price, industry-wide RPM was the standard way of it was a standard provision in most codes. Did it work? Absolutely not. In fact, it didn't work to the extent that recent economic studies tend to show a prolonged depression by 18 to 20 months. Why? Okay, first of all, yeah, workers got some of the benefits of the increase in wages, but the wages increased only in those industries that were covered by codes. Not all industries were covered by codes. Take the coal sector, the bituminous sector, that's the soft coal. Wages rose, that was a coded industry. Wages rose 40%. Great for those who were employed in the industry. In the hard coal sector, wages dropped. Coal mines are coal mines. What's the difference? Wages rose faster than prices. So if you were in a coded industry, the benefits of all of this went to the workers in coded industries. Now, what happens if your wage prices go up? What does that do to your incentives to hire people? It's a disincentive, right? So how does that help unemployment? It doesn't. In fact, it prevents mitigation of any unemployment problem. Okay? And because you need to increase prices, demand is down, so you're going to reduce production. So it was not just an ineffective way, it was contrary to a goal of increasing production within an industry. There's a similar attempt in the UK, cartelization of the coal industry. It didn't work. Essentially, instead of setting up a national monopoly, which later happened, the industry was cartelized on a regional basis. And the reason for its failure was the coal industry in the UK during that time did what all cartels do. Its members cheated on each other. So it failed as a result. Okay. So I mean, there is your clearest example. 1932, the National Industrial Recovery Act was ruled unconstitutional on other grounds, and Roosevelt brought in a second New Deal to sort of deal with this problem. But the data shows, I think, that this prolonged depression extensively. Just didn't work, it couldn't. Post-World War II in Europe, and since most of my examples, well, all of my examples henceforth will be European, this is the basis. The EU develops a competition regime, historically likely because of American influence via the Marshall Plan and the anti-cartel regime. The first aspect or elements of the competition regime was in the European Coal and Steel Treaty, which those provisions were reproduced in the 1957 Treaty of Rome, which set up the European Economic Community, the forerunner of the European Union. And they have not changed. The treaty provisions have remained verbatim since then. You may know Article 101 prohibits the agreements that are incompatible with internal markets, which have their object or effect the prevention, restriction, or distortion of competition. And then it lists 5 what we now tend to regard as hardcore cartel activities. Okay. Article 103, however, is very interesting. What it does is it sets up exceptions to Article 101. It recognizes that not all forms of collaboration or so-called collusion are necessarily bad. Okay. Certain agreements between undertakings, between competitors, undertaking, by the way, is just Euro speak for firm. Okay, it's just the European treaty. It comes from the German. I think it is. But it's somehow been translated into the general European Union discourse to mean firm. So Article 101.3 recognizes that in certain cases, if 4 criteria are met, then a agreement among competitors is perfectly permissible. So it has to improve the production or distribution of goods or promote technical or economic progress. It has to allow consumers a fair share of the resulting benefit. It cannot impose restrictions that are not indispensable to attaining the objectives of the goal. And it doesn't eliminate competition in respect to a substantial part of the market. Now, in crisis situations, I think it is fair to say that the criteria for to satisfy Article 101.3 were taken quite liberally. And prior to 2004, it was up to the Commission, the European Commission, to approve an agreement as to whether or not it satisfied those conditions. And up to 2004, the Commission was, to put it bluntly, quite relaxed about about the sort of evidence and the burden of proof in crisis situations with regard to Article 3. And there are 2 early cases that are kind of neat. And these cases are essentially parallels. The synthetic fiber and the Stichting-Bakstein, which is the Dutch brick industry case. Both of them about 10 years apart. And In fact, they're so identical that the commission decision in the Dutch brick industry case repeats verbatim the same reasoning in the synthetic fibers case. So closely that if two students submitted those as assignments, one would worry about collusion between the two students or plagiarism. Both industries, both cases were characterized by an industry-wide crisis with permanent shifts in consumer demand. There was a drop in the 80s in the demand for synthetic fibers, nylon, rayon, and the like, which were used in clothing. We had imports from primarily Turkey of natural fabrics. In the Dutch brick industry, because of construction and the change in architectural styles, people were no longer using bricks of a certain source. One thing about the European brick market is that each country and sometimes each region within a country have their own brick styles. So for instance, Dutch bricks would never be used in German buildings and vice versa, not just for the transport costs, but also for the aesthetics. Both industries were characterized because of the drop in demand by overcapacity. And in both industries, the industry wanted to establish agreements among members of the industry to coordinate a reduction in capacity, to sort of have an orderly contraction of the industry. And this orderly contraction in both cases was approved. How it would meet the criteria is that the more efficient plants would remain open, and this is in paragraph 34, synthetic fibers and brick industry, paragraph 26. So therefore, it would contribute to the productive efficiencies. Coordination and restructuring permits it to be done in acceptable social conditions. In other words, to avoid sudden mass layoffs that are associated with plant closure. Customers would benefit in the long term by a revitalization of the industry. And there's residual competition would remain. This is complete nonsense. Absolute nonsense, particularly in the Dutch brick industry case. Why? They were relying on competition from outside the area. Now, think in the Dutch brick industry case, what I just told you about bricks. You can't use German bricks in Dutch houses. But more significantly in bricks are heavy. They cost a lot to transport. So you can't even economically bring in bricks. Even if you could use German bricks in Dutch houses, it would just be uneconomical to do so. So in fact, accepting fiction as evidence in these cases was part and parcel of the way the Commission resolved this. And I point out that, the criteria were taken too loosely, possibly too loosely, and not a great deal of evidence. Okay? And we have a change in Europe. Thank goodness. Near the 21st century. We start seeing a more economic approach with the European Commission demanding greater and more detailed economic analysis. The reason for this was really twofold. I would say twofold. There's a number of reasons for this. The first reason was as a result of litigation losses by the Commission. They lost a few merger cases. And the European Court says your economic analysis is just so bad. We just can't accept. That's not really a good thing to be told for a competition agency to be told. The second is in 2004, the European Union expanded from 15 member states to 25 member states. Now, prior to 2004, as I mentioned, the Commission would examine proposed agreements between competitors to see if they were acceptable under Article 113. When you had 15 member states, that took, because of Commission resources, that took 18 to 24 months. Markets would change. You throw in another 10 member states, how long is that going to take? Right? Furthermore, if you devote all of these resources to looking at anti-competitive agreements, you take away resources from actually going out and finding cartels, because cartelists aren't going to advertise to the commission. They're not going to seek pre-approval of their price fixing. Okay? So just a bad allocation of resources. So in 2004, Europe switched from a system of pre-approval, pre-notification, to a system of self-assessment. So now undertakings, firms would have to decide for themselves whether the agreement is anti-competitive, whether the agreement could take advantage of Article 1013. Okay? And this is good, but it, as we'll see later, is also a bit of a problem. Okay. Now, there are two elements to this more economic approach. First of all, only economic concerns matter to competition law, and two, orthodox price theory, possibly game theory, is or are the appropriate tools to measure this. Now, this is good because it makes self-assessment easier. We all know what the criteria are. We get the economists in. The economists can use these tools. Economists can then show the benefits. So we can do the self-assessment. We don't have to worry about, say, the Commission's institutional memory, relying when we're Dutch brick industry, relying on synthetic fibers. Okay, about other non-agriculture. So it sets a nice, easy standard metric to deal with these metrics. But the new metric gives us different results, interesting results. The clearest and most interesting result, I think, is in the Competition Authority versus the Beef Industry Development Society, the BIDS case coming out of Ireland. I put the Tesco case in there because this is an illustration of crisis washing to justify a cartel. And then the ACM is the Dutch Competition Authority. And they had a very interesting analysis of the sustainability and animal welfare initiative in the chicken industry, which I'll get to these cases briefly. The BIDS case is very similar to the synthetic fibers and the Dutch chicken industry. Overcapacity in the Irish beef slaughter industry. Ireland raises a lot of cows to be slaughtered, and it doesn't eat the amount of cows it raises. It exports, significant exports. The cause of the problem was when Ireland joined the EU in 1973, it was able to tap into the Common Agricultural Policy funds and receive subsidies. Okay, subsidies is not the cause of the crisis. And to subsidize the beef production process. And once you receive subsidies, that divorces the production from market realities. So they started producing more subsidized production of more and more beef, but nobody could eat it, and you couldn't even export that amount of beef. Okay. Industry realized it had an overcapacity problem. It hired Mackenzie Consulting to come in and advise us. The net result of the consultation was that you need to cut capacity by just under a third, 32%. So the beef industry formed the Irish Beef Industry Development Society with the goal of coordinating an orderly restructuring of the industry to reduce capacity. Just as was done in the 10 years before that in the Dutch brick industry and 20 years before it in the synthetic fiber industry. The beef industry approached the Irish Competition Authority. This was still under the old regime, the Irish Competition for Assistance. The Irish Competition Authority refused to engage. So now you figure it out, it's your problem. So the beef industry developed a regime by which there would be an orderly reduction of capacity in the slaughter industry, Those leaving the industry would be compensated by those remaining in the industry. There'd be strict limits on the production of meat. If you exceeded the limits, you would be fined. The Irish Competition Authority said, no, this is a problem, we can't do this. Okay, and it went to the European Court of Justice. There's a means by which you can refer cases involving require the resolution of a European law problem to national cases to the European courts. And the European court said, no, this was a by-object violation of Article 1011, right? Any reduction in capacity is or in production is a restriction by object of competition. It's by object. So some justification was required under Article 113, and the Irish Supreme Court referred it back to the trial court to hear this justification. And the trial court, interestingly enough, the judge seemed to be very sympathetic to it. It was Justice Mackenzie, who later became a member of the Irish Supreme Court. Heard the arguments, but the commission intervened. The commission has a right to appear as an amicus curiae, and argued that the provisions were contrary to 113. As a result, the Beef Industry Development Society withdrew its actions before the so it collapsed. Now, the core of the European Court of Justice's reasoning as to why such industry-wise agreements are found in this paragraph 35, and it says that the principle of European competition, of the European competition regime, is that each economic operator must independently determine their own market strategy. Obviously, industry-wide agreements is a violation of that principle. We see this reasoning appear today. In fact, the most recent case I saw today, the European Court of Justice reproduced these words in a decision in January. So it's still a valid principle of competition. So any industrial collaboration that eliminates the possibility of an undertaking from formulating its own market strategy is a violation of European competition law, unless it meets 113. Okay. So this makes it difficult, slightly more difficult for companies in Europe to organize themselves in this way. European dairy case, I'm not going to get into it much in this talk, it's in the book. This is an out-and-out cartel among the dairies and the milk farmers. The milk industry, dairy industry, lobbied for political support and said, well, we're not making enough money. Well, the dairies were making a ton of money. Well, most of the dairies were making a ton of money. The farmers were not. The dairies were simply squeezing the farmers. Okay. So the farmers and the farmers are well organized in Europe. So they use their political clout, their lobbying potential to appeal to parliament. They got parliamentary support because, after all, everybody loves the farmers. Early day motion in support of this arrangement. This is problematic because you get the politicians involved. Unless you have a strong competition agency, bad things happen. The competition authorities, the OFT, predecessor to the CMA, investigated this and said, no, there's no trouble here. There's no problem with the industry. You're just trying to justify a cartel. So this is a clear example of a problem we see when we argue about suspending competition rules in a crisis, is that people will dream up a crisis so the competition rules will be suspended so that they can justify a cartel, which doesn't alleviate the price of the crisis. It merely raises the price to go into an increase in profits. Final European case I want to talk about, at least in collusion, is the Dutch chicken and tomato case. kip van worden in Dutch. Animal welfare is rather important in the Netherlands. The Netherlands has a political party, the Party for Animals. It receives just over 5% of the votes, and with the proportional representation system, it has seats in both houses of parliament. So people do take, the Dutch public takes animal rights seriously. And this was a controversial proposal involving animal welfare considerations in the chicken industry, where the industry, recognizing public sentiment, sought a minimum standard of treatment. In other words, bigger cages, better food, less light, give the chickens a chance to sleep in the dark for their short little lives. Okay? Price was not going to be part of the agreed standard. Essentially, what they wanted to do was increase the size of the chicken cages. Now, what happens if you increase the size of the chicken cages is that you raise fewer chickens. So that's going to be, how should we say, an output reduction. So, but as a result, chicken welfare would go up. The chickens would be marginally happier. Prices, because there would be fewer chickens produced, would also go up. Okay, sounds like a win-win situation, except how much does the prices go up? And the fact is, how much are people willing to pay to buy the chickens this happiness? Okay. And so the Dutch Competition Authority ran very good at running consumer surveys on a willingness to pay basis, and found that consumers are only willing to pay a small amount for happy chicken. In other words, 68 euro cents per kilo. There would be an environmental effect, an environmental gain of about 14 cents per kilo, and there's no positive effect on public health. So the benefits to the consumers would be about 82 euro cents per kilo chicken meat. However, fewer chickens, happy chickens, more costly to raise chickens, cost to raise chickens, €1.46. So the prices would have to go up at least €1.46, but consumers are only going to pay 82 cents. Problem. Dutch Competition Authority says, no, you can't do this. Now, in a country like the Netherlands, where animal welfare is significant, you can imagine the outcry. There's a rather rude English expression. So the costs exceed the benefits, so it was held to be an anti-competitive agreement. But interestingly enough, the Dutch chicken industry just didn't give up. They realized there's a public sentiment involved, and so what they did is they went to their plan B. But their plan B turned out to be better than their plan A. Okay? Independently, the major supermarket in the Netherlands, Albert Heijn, developed a set of standards for chicken welfare and the conditions under which chickens were raised. We have a gold standard, a silver standard, and a bronze standard. So the Olympics of chicken raising. And we're gold standard, more welfare, happier chicken, more expensive, silver and bronze. We have standards about day and night, standards about feed, standards about access to outdoors, and bigger cages, etc. And these standards were then verified by the Dutch Society for Animal Welfare. So an independent, respected body verifying the standards. They rolled out this production method, and then a few months later, the number 2 chain followed. Jumbo, used to be C1000. And this was successful. This was accepted by the Dutch, so people could voluntarily pick the animal welfare of the chicken that they were consuming, animal welfare level. There was still mean chicken or unhappy chicken available, but people's consumption switched away from that. And in fact, the amount of mean chicken shrunk on the supermarket shelves. You can still get it, but not much is sold. And the animal welfare conditions of chickens raised under these standards exceeded the animal welfare conditions which were proposed under the original standard. So everybody was better off. The consumers are forced to pay extra. The chickens are happier for their short lives. And consumers have a choice of different classifications based upon willingness to pay, welfare levels. And the standards are verified by a respected organization. If you want higher animal welfare, you pay more, but you're not forced to pay. Now note, in all of these problems, synthetic fibers, Dutch chicken, dairy industry, Irish beef, none of these problems were caused by too little monopoly in the market, right? So theoretically, we're reducing competition, relaxing the competition rules is not the solution. Turning to the next example, financial crisis. How much longer do I have to talk? I can talk all day. When do you want me to shut up?
Again, another 20, 30 minutes.
30 minutes, okay. Fair enough. Is that okay with you?
Here you have the monopoly of the time.
I hate monopolists. Self-hate. Okay, the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, multiple causes, right? Moral hazard in the banking industry, opaquely valued securities, credit rating issues, mismatch of funding, and wholesale markets. Just a gigantic story. The result was undercapitalization of financial institutions. When banks are undercapitalized, you have to have a capital reserve. So if you're undercapitalized, money has to go into your capital reserve, so you can't use the money to lend to people. And as you know, you've all taken commercial law, you know that credit and lending is sort of the oil that lubricates the machinery of commerce. Okay, no, it's just like an engine. No oil, the engine seizes up. Okay, so undercapitalization, cutbacks to lending to the real economy problems. Two responses globally, at least two responses. The first was state aid. State aid to recapitalize and support lending to the real economy, given basically bailing banks out. And as much as I hate mergers and state aid, I think we had no choice then, but that's a separate rant. The other case was merger, at least in the UK and the Netherlands. I'll focus more on the merger response. In the UK, the government managed or had to bail out with state aid a number of financial institutions. And, so every day or every week you see another bank being bailed out. And that soon became unpopular, right? The whole idea of the government handing taxpayers hard-earned money over to the bankers that caused the problem. At least that's the popular discourse. Nearing the end of the bailing out phase, a problem arose with Halifax Bank of Scotland. Okay, one of the larger banks. The Halifax Bank of Scotland held 20% of the UK mortgage market, 16% of the savings market, and used wholesale financing, particularly leveraging into American securities to finance its operations. There was problems in the UK in 2007, so its solution was to increase corporate lending. Probably not good. They got into trouble very fast because of their exposure to the US, and particularly the US subprime mortgage market. In contrast, Lloyds Bank is another large bank, was a very solid position, had no such exposure. And in the government's mind, in Gordon Brown's mind, it was the ideal candidate to take over HBOS before it failed. Okay, so the government encouraged a merger. Encouraged is a sort of a mild way of putting it. Okay, and the idea was, with a merger, HBOS would be rescued, but more importantly, we wouldn't need to be seen to be putting public funds into yet another bank. Okay. As was the case with all mergers, this had to be looked at on an in this case, on an expedited basis by the competition authorities. Competition authorities were able to look at it within a week or so because they've done some earlier investigations of potential mergers. So they knew the market quite well. They found there were less competition in so-called current accounts. Current accounts are the sort of accounts that everybody has to sort of pay in their paycheck, pay their bills from, so on and so forth. And this is whether you're an individual or a business. It would also reduce competition to smaller and medium enterprises and competition in the mortgage market. And the merged entity would be the clear leader banks that held personal current accounts, and the post-merger HHI in the personal market would be 1950 with a delta of 500. Those of you who know merger control, this is a bit of a problem. Okay, so the competition authorities were going to block this. They say, no, can't do it, anti-competitive. The word that the competition authorities came out late one day and overnight, and I literally mean overnight, the government changed the rules to allow an exemption to approve mergers, the government to approve mergers, quote, in the interest of maintaining the stability of the UK financial system. So the next morning, under this new rule, the merger was approved. Consequence of the merger, first of all, well, state aid, a bailout was still needed. Oops, 17 billion. Secondly, it concentrated the UK bank market even further. This concentration was primarily felt in Scotland, where essentially the new merged entity had no competitor. And we had a similar case, or there was a similar case in the Netherlands with Fortis ABN AMRO. And studies there show that concentration led to a drop of rates on savings accounts, interest rates paid on savings accounts. And the drop led to a decrease of about 70 million euros in 2010. And typically those who rely on interest from savings accounts tend to be, quote, less educated consumers with lower savings. So the merger had a disparate impact upon the less wealthy people in the Netherlands. Okay, the real problem with this, okay, is that, at least in the UK, merger didn't solve anything. We still had the problem with the state aid, so that was not a good thing. Merger concentrated the banking industry. Financial crisis is over. The merged entity still exists. The anti-competitive consequences of that merged entity are still seen in Scotland. Reduction in banks, okay? In banking capacity. So it wasn't even are with us today. Let's look at COVID as a final. What did we see in COVID? We saw asymmetric shifts in demand, so an increased demand for some products, hand gel, face masks, decreased demand for others. Okay. Increased demand led to hoarding behavior, right? Everybody buys everything. People just got weird. Toilet paper, pasta, rice, that was all sought in our cases. And I guess it's sort of semi-rational. If you see toilet paper disappearing from the shelves, go out and buy extra toilet paper. I know I did, and I consider myself apparently rational to a point. Okay. But studies show that people just buy a little bit more, maybe 10%, 20%, not, the stories of people buying 3 times their yearly consumption. That were few and far between. So, and but it was significant enough because of just-on-time deliveries to see gaps in the shelves, and thus to cause panic. Okay. So, in the early stages, and I've shown you on the slides, we saw suggestions that members of industry speak to coordinate. Of course, with increases in demand, we saw increases in prices. It's normal market phenomenon. People don't understand that. They view it as price gouging. So there's a desire to crack down on price gouging. And we also saw desires to relax merger laws to make it easy for firms to sue. Now ask ourselves, does coordination bring in more and cheaper goods? No. Prices rise as a result of scarcity. That sends a market signal to bring in more goods, for the rest of the market to bring in more goods to compete the price down. Okay? Cartels do not necessarily bring in more goods. In fact, cartels have the opposite effect. If you have coordination in an industry, you are likely to build market barriers to prevent others from bringing in goods to compete your prices down. Okay? So cartelists historically erect market barriers. And the market barriers can be of various sorts. Story. I was telling you about when I met the acquisitions at Cambridge. On the way down to the reception in London, I was taking a cab to the train station. And we had on the radio, there was somebody being on one of these talk radio shows, somebody from a hand gel manufacturer being interviewed. And the host of the radio show asked this person, well, look, hand gel's in short supply, antibacterial or antiviral hand gel. Can we not make our own? Can I not go to the drugstore, the pharmacy, and buy rubbing alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, and some aloe jello cream, mix the two together, and now I've got hand gel? Okay? Obvious solution. In fact, so obvious if you look at the WHO health guidelines, that's a recommended solution. Okay, so it's not just an obvious solution, a legitimate solution to the problem. What does the hand gel person say? She says, no, you can't do that. You need ethanol alcohol. The problem with ethanol alcohol is it's really hard to get because you can drink it. Okay, that's the alcohol that's in alcoholic beverages. 100% ethanol alcohol used to be a student's favorite. You mix it with a bit of water and food. You get a very cheap drink. Okay, everybody loved pharmacy students because they had access to it. So ethanol alcohol is heavily regulated, often heavily taxed. But the industry sponsor says, no, you need ethanol alcohol. Why? Because the molecules in isopropanol alcohol are bigger. And because they're bigger, they won't get into the pores of your skin to adequately kill the viruses that might be in that. Now, it's true, isopropanol alcohol molecules are bigger, but we're dealing with things at the molecular level. That's complete, utter nonsense from a chemist's perspective. But yet you repeat that message out in the public, it doesn't work because of the pseudoscientific explanation. You are now erecting a market barrier. You are now encouraging people not to do the reasonable thing, but to go out and buy your overpriced product. Okay? So, and then supply goods. High price, you have a race to compete to bring in goods. Furthermore, motivation. Who's saying this? Industry. What's industry's motivation even in a crisis? Are they really that sort of public spirited, or do they have their shareholders to answer to? And if they're both, who's trying the greatest? Be the shareholders they're answering to. In a crisis, if firms can cooperate, what would they agree upon? Store closures? Well, store closures give people geographic monopolies. And these geographical monopolies would, in COVID times, be reinforced by the fact that people can't travel as much. We weren't allowed to go out of the house for more than an hour a day, which sort of interfered with shopping. Product range. Remember the toilet paper slide at the beginning? Yeah, you use something like 47 different varieties of toilet paper in the UK. You reduce the availability down, probably to the most profitable. Okay. Distribution and stock levels, you can enforce cartels that way. Okay. Competition with vaccines and ventilators. There was competition, at least in the West, and by the West, I mean not Sputnik and not Sinovac, the Chinese and Russian vaccines. Beneficial cooperation is perfectly consistent with European and I believe with every other competition regime in the world. If you look at the race to achieve the vaccine, a quality vaccine, you see that of the Western vaccines, all but Johnson & Johnson vaccines were developed by consortia, by cooperative agreements. Okay? And because you had various consortia competing against each other, there was a race to produce effective, quality vaccines fast. Okay, and in fact, these companies won that race. Okay, collaborative efforts, operating in a competitive agreement. Again, with design and production of ventilators in short supply in the early stages, which is a similar case. So competition here, I think, helped resolve the crisis. Imagine what would have happened if a government, let's say, we won't name China or Russia, said only one vaccine is going to be produced, no competition, you produce it. Look at the results. Okay. Price gouging, when is the price too high? Okay, price gouging, everybody got concerned about prices. Price gouging is only a competition problem if it's done by a dominant entity. In the UK, in the US, price gouging is almost perfectly legal except in some states. And the price gouging is typically reflected as some extra margin above costs, but determining from a cost accounting basis, determining costs is quite difficult. There's all sorts of problems determining exactly how much it costs, particularly when you have economies of scope. Preventing increases in prices will not lead to more goods. In fact, it probably does the opposite. If you can't get the goods in at the market price, you're not going to bring the goods in, period, full stop. It reduces incentives to bring in new goods. And in fact, if you look at price caps in other markets, the New York Rent Control Act, which imposes price caps on rent in New York, is well studied. It shows that there's a problem. There was talk a few weeks ago about in the UK imposing price caps on grocery items. And for once, our government had a reasonably sane idea and said, no, we won't do this. So thank goodness for a moment of sanity in our politics. And now, the real problem with price increases and upwards price shocks is that competition law doesn't do well with that. That's really not a competition law. Okay? So we really can't ask competition lawyers to solve how we're going to get the price down. But what competition lawyers are good at is looking at market barriers, entry barriers, like this nonsense about isopropyl alcohol in the toothpaste, and pointing out where the entry barriers are, because if you can eliminate the entry barriers, that allows for easier flow of goods into a market that will hopefully reduce the price. So the identification of such is important. Merger in COVID, it's the same problem as merger in financial institutions. Financial crisis is over. The hangover in the Scottish banking market is still there. It still exists. Merger in COVID would have led to the same situation. COVID would did eventually go away to a certain extent. but if you allow for mergers, it still exists. There's a saying, and this is the final saying on the slide. In the UK, we have the Royal Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Because people get their children dogs at Christmas, they say a dog is for life, not for Christmas. So I've adopted this slogan: a merger is for life, not just for a crisis. So, okay, environment and sustainability. That's I'm trying to end here. What's the associated market failure involving the environment? I would suggest things like externalities, provision of quasi-public and public goods. Will adding more monopolies cure the reason? I don't think so. Okay, externalities, good ideas would be to externalize costs, Cauchy bargaining, get strong assumptions there. You need strong initial assignments of rights. And in a large community, you have holdouts and free rider problems. Pijovian taxes to deal with externalities. These are unpopular, carbon taxes. Look at what happened with the yellow vests movement in France, when they imposed carbon taxes and drove the price of fuel up. You had riots in the streets of Paris. Now, my claim, and the claim I make in the book, is there's nothing in the European competition rules that prevents effective resolution of sustainability issues. The competition rules are good at preventing so-called greenwashing or crisis washing of claims. There are, in fact, nonsensical claims about how a certain arrangement would benefit the environment, but the arrangement is actually designed to increase producer welfare. Okay? The environment problem is a multifaceted problem. It cannot be solved through competition law alone. Okay, but more significantly, competition law doesn't really hinder solutions. I argue also that integrating competition concerns, environmental and other such concerns into competition law is a problem. It involves a rule of law issue. Competition authorities should look at, in my mind, the competition aspects of a problem. They're neither trained, nor do they necessarily have the legal mandate to look at environmental concerns. Okay. Now, the goal in these cases is, in my mind, for competition authorities to investigate investigate agreements that are said to be in the interest of sustainability and environment. You can assume that when two undertakings, two firms get together, they're doing so in a self-interested basis. That would be my prima facie assumption. They make environmental or other sustainability claims. I think the goal or the job of competition agencies here is to examine those claims. Because we can crisis wash, we can dress some things up as a crisis, get the politicians involved, whip up public opinion to sell something that actually doesn't solve the problem, that expropriates consumer welfare. We saw that in the UK with the milk crisis, which is time and time again. Okay. The manner forward, I suggest, is similar to the Dutch chicken case. That's why I picked on the Dutch chicken case. Scrutinize the proposed agreements. Is this in the consumer's best interest? Is this the best way of advancing the goal? It's also consistent with or advances the consumer's interest. In the Dutch chicken case, we saw the first proposal, it didn't work. But a second proposal, that worked. Okay? But also in the Dutch chicken case, you had the heavy involvement of the Dutch Competition Authority guiding people. You didn't see that in the Irish beef industry case. That was, I think, the big flaw in the Irish case. Okay, now, yes, there may be some beneficial agreements. There may be a desire among companies, firms, to engage in this sort of industry-wide collaboration on green standards and the like. And I would give them the benefit of the doubt that this was honestly designed to alleviate the sustainability issue. But you still need, so you're going to need some coordination, but you also need guidance. You need coordination because otherwise every firm will develop its own standards. Customers won't be able to compare things. Industry-wide standards are good, involving coordination. Okay, so your alignment on methodologies at minimum. Linklaters, the big global law firm, suggested that about 57% of the clients are interested in working towards these goals. But the problem is without effective and appropriate guidance from the competition authorities, firms are worried about crossing the line into collusion. And collusion in Europe can get you fined in hundreds of millions and billions of euros. Nobody wants to justify that to the shareholders. Okay, so in many instances, because of the risk of a fine, the project's been abandoned. And you reduce the risk of the fine by following explicit guidance or by obtaining comfort letters. And this is where I think another area where I believe that competition agencies can get involved to assist in this project. And so without the guidance, undertakings firms are sort of will steer away. They're just not interested in potentially crossing the line. And so the Dutch Competition Authority here, I think, was at the vanguard of all of this and issued guidance. We're seeing new guidance in the UK. Europe has recently rewritten its guidelines on horizontal cooperation to include material that was taken out in the previous version of the guidance regarding environmental measures. Agreed codes of conduct in general are not, and this is OEC guidance, are not anti-competitive if the criteria are transparent and access is based on a non-discriminatory basis. So that's my goal. So that's what I say in the book. I provided a copy of the book. I hope if you're in the invite, you've received it. Don't feel obliged to read it, but it's there. And as I said before, adults on Cambridge, I sent it to you. Okay? Thank you. Just go somewhere. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Bruce from Durham University. Such an honor to have you here. Thanks for your lecture. I'd like to open the floor to some questions. Current challenges of competition law. I would keep the book. So, what is the answers for the response to the crisis regarding competition law? Respostas do direito à concorrência para a crise. So, I open the floor for the audience and also for Marco, Juliana, and René, so they can ask for Professor Bruce your questions. Those from the audience, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Rafaela.
Hello.
I do have a question. In Brazil, a long time ago, we had a sugar problem. We were overproducing sugar. So the government solution was to buy all of this extra sugar and stock it and then let it rot. I was thinking, how do you feel about this solution?
Okay. Well, that's the real problem is overproduction. Okay. Okay, now, it's what the government does, okay? So the government spends a whole lot of taxpayers' money. You know, they could have just burned the sugar, they could have just, but instead paid more money to store the sugar. Burning the sugar is going to be an environmental problem, so, okay. Now, if you have overproduction, now, you have, what was the cause of the overproduction? Was it subsidies that caused the overproduction? So,
It's the international crisis.
the crisis, so a drop in demand. Okay. Now, the government's spending a ton of money. How can it spend that money? Okay. Typically, we look at these sort of government expenditures in the form of state aid or subsidy because it's in effect a subsidy on unwanted goods. Because if the government didn't buy it, it wouldn't sell. So you're subsidizing that. Okay. Now you can do a number of ways of supporting that. One way of supporting that is often giving the money to companies so that they continue on the same process. Another way of doing that is rather than giving the money to the companies, is telling the companies to shut things down and give the money directly to the workers. Okay, for retraining or as a capital sum for retirement. Or if you don't trust the employees with a capital sum, give them enhanced pension. Okay, capital sums tend to be anticipated. Now, my thinking, without knowing the structure of the Brazilian sugar industry, is that maybe the money was misdirected. And rather than on an annual basis buying too much sugar, spend a bit less money giving it. And I see nothing wrong. In fact, I see everything. If you're giving money, or you make the political choice to give money to industries, to restructure the industry, giving that money as a form of government support, give it to the workers. I don't care if, okay, I'm fairly capitalist, fairly small and in that case. But isn't the whole point of investing in a company, one of the reasons why you get a return is because you take a risk? And you see this being, if I invest and buy shares in a company through a stockbroker in the UK, I would see a little message warning. You're investing in this means your capital is at risk. You might get less back than you put in. But because of the risk, you get a return. Employees don't have that choice. Okay, so by investing in the company, one way or the other, the owners of the company took that risk. The owners of the company had the possibility, or did have the return. Risk turns out bad, the bet turned out bad. That's market life. The alternative suggestion is giving it to the employees who have no such option. So
Thank you.
That's just my initial response, semi-ignorant response.
Hi, my name is Lisa. Considering the subprime crisis, do you think that European Union and UK regulations are more prepared to deal and to avoid another crisis like that?
I think no.
Bruce, can I add something to the question of Lisa? Then you can answer. A few months ago, we saw this problem going on in the US, the bankruptcy of Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank. And a couple weeks, and then we have the intervention of the government, saying all the people that have your money invested in those banks do not lose anything. The federal government, you reimburse.
Yeah, essentially they increased the threshold of the deposit insurance to all losses.
And maybe it was a wrong message to the market saying, you don't worry if you take risk, because at the end the government will help you. Maybe. Okay. And then a couple of weeks ago, we saw the first Republic Bank, again, the bankruptcy. And then the bank was took over by J.P. Morgan. And the American law says, if a big bank, okay, cannot buy small banks to avoid the concentration of the market. But there is an exception in the law that if that bank is bound to break, to fail, a big bank can buy this. And it was exactly what happened. So just adding this, because I think it makes sense with the question.
For preparation for the crisis, I think I think both the European Commission and the UK regulators were caught off guard. Okay, what they did is they, I would say, scrambled around, but they worked hard to develop strong solutions. The European Commission, I think, acted appropriately. They continued on business as normal. They obviously had a big task with state aid, with all the subsidy programs to support businesses that would go under. I'm not going to talk about state aid this time. That's a whole, actually, come to Durham and take the state aid course. But what we saw coming out of the European Commission was the first ever use of comfort letters to the generic pharmaceutical industry about organizing production of generic drugs to ensure that we got things such as paracetamol, supply chain problems, that was a problem. And so basically that precedent was set, so we're seeing more and more use of this means. And furthermore, the Commission realizes hand in hand with comfort letters comes greater guidance, so they're going in and producing greater guidance. The UK was governmentally a mess. They were just celebrating the Boris Johnson victory and the, how should we say, pulling out of the EU and all of that really horrible stuff. And they were in effect caught. What the UK government's response was, it was a political response. It was to exempt the grocery industry from the competition rules. Okay, so this collaboration did take place. But the problem was the details of the collaboration were very opaque. We don't know exactly what was done. Okay. It was precisely the wrong response. The CMA, as a non-government, non-ministerial government agency, carried on business as normal. They didn't produce any significant guidance or anything like that. They dealt with mergers on a case basis and applied the same rules. In fact, they said, given the crisis, we're not going to change. It's probably bad to change the rules. So we're going to change the rules. As to banks, okay, the real problem with banks is, first of all, moral hazard. Okay, if you're able to bet and, how should we say, and gain all the upside of the bet, gain all your winnings, and somebody else will reimburse you if you're a loser. You're just going to gamble, right? I love a casino like that, even though it's gambling. The problem is there's a significant moral hazard in the banking industry and with raising the deposit insurance thresholds. The real problem, though, is a lot of people aren't really aware of the difference between a solvency problem and a liquidity problem in banks. They're two different problems. When people hear a bank is illiquid, they think they're going to lose all their savings. They start lining up. When they hear a bank is insolvent, they start lining up. People start, and a bank failure, company failures are good. If you see the local department store going under, you can line up to get a good deal on a sale. Bank failure, the lineups are for different reasons. Okay. And then if people see you not understanding what's going on, you start withdrawing it, and that sets off a vicious circle. Does raising the level of deposit protection help? I think it exacerbates the moral hazard problem. I think it may. I mean, there's ways of ensuring the risk. You should maybe have a standard sort of minimum, and then if you want more deposit protection, the depositor pays a premium to protect their money. I'm not sure what the way around. As to banks taking over failing banks, the failing firm defense in the EU works as follows: is if a firm is going out of business, and if a dominant or a very large company is going to acquire the firm, it is acceptable only if those assets would inevitably flow to the acquiring firm, okay, to that very firm, not just any other firm in the market, but that firm in the market. The problem, though, is in assessing this takes a time period. The problem with the banks is you want these resolutions overnight. Typically in the US, when you have a failing bank, they're taken over by the government at close of business on Friday. Changes made over the weekend because banks didn't used to work on the weekends, and then reopened under a new label the next Monday morning. So you need just to reassure the clients. And that's sort of the European failing firm defense, that reassurance isn't present. So there may be an argument for expediting things. Was J.P. Morgan the appropriate, should we say, entity to merge with? Probably not, because of it's too big. Could they have gotten another bank to merge with the failing bank? Probably, but that would have taken time. Time is uncertainty, and then I think it exacerbates the problem. So there's a real difficulty there. So that's a real problem there. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I know that given J.P. Morgan more of a market share was probably not the answer.
Hi, Professor. My name is Vinicius, and thanks for being here with us. In relation to the environment, sustainability goals and prices, and thinking about the division of powers between environmental authorities and competition authorities, do you see any conflict or risk in trusting competition authority to deal with environmental issues in competition cases?
Do I see a risk? Yeah, I see a risk, rule of law risk. Okay, I like to think that competition authorities should look at the economic crises, so the economic aspects. I think what competition authorities are good at is to put it somewhat crudely, cutting through the bullshit, and to, because you see a lot of greenwashing, and look at the original, and it's related to sustainability in the environment, the Dutch chicken case. There's a lot of green sustainability and welfare washing of that case there. And I think competition authorities can point out these are the costs. Okay. Environmental authorities, I think they take, as rightly so, take other criteria into account. Now you have but I think they're the wrong criteria for competition authorities to take into account, and perhaps competition considerations are the wrong considerations for environmental to take into account. Now, ultimately, then you've got a report, and in many respects, at least in a democracy, that's a political decision. Hopefully, you have, and I say that hopefully because I look at the talent that we have in the UK, and I certainly have the appropriate talent to make the right decision. But I think at some point where there's a balancing, the balancing has to be outside of local authorities, with the authorities giving their inputs and putting the weight on the various scales. So.
Professor Bruce, good morning. My question was exactly on the issue of sustainability and the role of competition law. First of all, very good to be here. Thank you for hosting this Professor Vicente. You are saying very clearly that environmental sustainability are not a matter for competition law.
Not necessarily.
I noticed in the your PowerPoint that you were addressing the issue of environmental as being a public good, which of course is.
Yes.
Public goods are products that can only be produced by whether most of the people or whether all the people engage and cooperate.
Yeah.
So cooperation is pretty much on the basis of the production of public goods. So my question is, and then if you go to competition, competition is the opposite. You don't want companies to cooperate, right? So you want companies to be driven to maximize their profits and to make the best in terms of innovation, in terms of technology, in terms of economy scale, so on. But you concede that this should be dealt from a legislative and regulatory matter. Should we consider whether the subject matter of the potential cooperation agreement between competitors is the production of public goods? And would that be an interesting approach or framework? And should this be made clear when this is addressed?
Okay. Public goods are interesting. We need them, right? Things like the police, military, public health. We need public goods. Public goods are underproduced in the private market, simply because you cannot internalize all the benefits of it. That is free rider problems. Ultimately, production of public goods will never be well produced in a competitive environment. You will need some limits to competition to produce these goods. These limits can be via entities that are tasked with the production of public goods and are likely funded through some way of raising the revenue. Think of the armed forces. That's a public good defense. Public health service is a public good, I would think. And typically, these are taxpayer financed. Environment, there's a public good aspect to it there. There's also a market failure aspect to it there. We can, the market failure aspect is, of course, with externalities, as the public good issue is obvious. But also there can be cooperative solutions in the public, in a market driven by consumer demand, to reduce some of these externalities. Now, not all cooperation, not all collaboration is bad, period. Okay, that is clear. Research and development, that is good within certain limits. Okay? The Europeans have a very illuminating guideline about the limits to research. And my example there are the COVID vaccinations, the vaccines. Again, collaborative research and developments. Standardization requires collaboration, collaborative agreements. That is good. If you have an Android phone and somebody else has a Mac from an Apple phone, without an agreement on standards for sending text messages or images, the two worlds couldn't talk. Okay, that's just without standards, you get real hold up problems with consumers. I'm of the generation where we used to. Do you know what video cassette recorders are? You know, back in the old days before streaming, you had okay, I'm in the generation where we had VHS and Betamax, two competing standards. Okay, VHS won that war. I'm also of the generation where with CDs, we had the Blu-rays and I held off on mine, so consumer holdup until that war was settled. Okay, because I wasn't going to invest A, in a player, but more importantly B, in a bunch of movies that would become archaic once that war settled. Okay, so but that's evidence of lack of standards there and how it harms. Has standards been agreed earlier, the market would have changed, consumers would have had the certainty. Standardization is good, research and development is good. Sometimes distribution agreements can be good to share to share networks. Okay, but then again, you need to worry about these sorts of agreements having anti-competitive consequences, blocking out new entrants, etc. So not all collaboration is bad, and there's a great space in addressing environmental concerns for industry-wide collaboration. The real problem is the fine line between good collaboration and bad collaboration, with this fine line as it exists in the competition enforcer's mind and likely in the court's mind. You don't want to get anywhere near that line. You don't want to, as a lawyer, you don't want to advise your clients to get anywhere near that line because of the risk of antitrust fines. In Europe, they can be substantial. So the way of avoiding that, and this is where I see, as I was saying, the role of competition agencies is for any sort of market-driven solutions to reducing some of these environmental concerns, is to give clear and precise guidance, whether that's in the form of guidelines or in very novel cases, actual comfort letters, saying we will not prosecute, we will not get involved, because we think this agreement pursues the goal and the society and consumers benefit. Here's the
Thank you again, Professor. First of all, I'd like to thank Mackenzie to host this moment for us that we are getting together with IBRAC and also my university. It's great to have this opportunity and talk with you, Professor, about all the ideas that I think are very important after the whole pandemic. We had, I believe in 2020, during the ASCOLA meeting, it was virtual, right? But we had a whole session discussing prices and also the effects related to the prices in Brazil, Latin America, but also during the whole discussion, the problem was about price gouging and the control of prices that some countries were doing during that time. And the good thing about sharing these ideas was to realize that the authorities, generally the competition authorities, they are very concerned about it. Of course, we have the free market, and here in Brazil, I think we did a good job during the pandemic, considering the constitutional principle that makes not only competition but free market as a base of our constitutional law. But what I saw during that time is that when we go a little bit further and we start to talk about these issues with consumer specialists in Brazil, consumer law specialists, the view is not the same. So some of the points here, I was making several notes. Of course, we are talking about forms of market failures too, and I still believe that we must focus on economic concerns when we are dealing with competition law, so I am following you. But I think the question that is becoming, this question is always coming, is that if it's necessary to change the rules that we have to deal with other issues, just like here we are focusing on environmental issues, and also yesterday we were talking about digital markets, and of course we have different market failures that we can identify now because the society changed, and also because during the pandemic we were much more inside the digital markets and using much more the tools that we have, of course, based on the fact that we were inside our homes, right? But when we were just tackling the subject about the environmental issues, assuming that we still have to have this concern and focus on matters related to economics and not thinking about, you know, the crisis moment. Is it necessary to go a little bit further to open this discussion? Because I think that Europe is doing a good job, of course, opening much more the discussion to new issues. Here in Brazil, I think we were much more conservative and trying not to change the rules and not to change the way Cade, for example, was dealing with those issues. What I can see now is that the world is changing, right? And maybe we are not using the good tools that we have to touch to all the good examples that were given by your book here and your presentation, just like greenwashing. It's just a matter of consumer or environmental, or we really need to think about it when we were dealing with a case at Cade, right? So these issues are very difficult for us in Brazil now. I would like to share this because I still think that this kind of conference is very important to share what competition law is and what the authority do, and that everything that we talk about related to competition is related to our lives, right? But still during the conference that I am following, and yesterday I was at Paraná State, many people, they don't know nothing about competition. They know about the other instruments, and this kind of discussion is far away from them. Even when you are talking inside, you know, important universities in Brazil, and I think that in Europe you are in the second phase. It's much more comfortable to talk about new issues that can be analyzed inside competition cases. So can you share with us if you think that now, after coronavirus crisis, of course, we can face new, different pandemics, and I don't like to think about it now, but the lessons that we can have, and also the issues we must talk in a worldwide perspective, that you think that is still away from, these visions, because we have this difference between the maturity, of course, how do you do in Europe, and how they do in the US and deal with those issues. I think it's much more comfortable than here in Brazil, that we still have with us the controlling thing, and also we don't think that those aspects should be handled or touched by the antitrust authorities.
Okay, thank you. Competition and competition rules affect all of us. We all live in a market. Everything we do buy goods and services. We have markets. Even if you wanted to escape from markets, you'd have to go to someplace like North Korea. They have black markets and implicit markets, implicit markets in their arrangements. Now, I'm of the old school and hence of the old, I guess the Brazilian approach where competition is competition and that's what competition authorities do. I think that there's a number of market failures out there and there are a number of social problems out there. I think it's clear that even though we live in a market society, competition law can't solve all social problems. Okay. Can competition law hinder these social problems? I don't think so. I'm not going to say no because somebody knows what the power is at. Okay. But what I can say is, in all of these crises, I don't think competition will hinder the solution to the problem. Competition laws, I was trying to say, is really good at spotting and addressing the market failures associated with the problem. Very good at dealing with identifying market barriers. Have we not listened to that woman from the hand gel industry? Pharmacists who have been able to make hand gel in the early stages. It's sold as a produced price. Okay. Well, what is the role? But now we're seeing, and we see this in the US with the FTC under Khan. We see this in the UK where competition seems to, or its competition agencies seem to be addressing problems, let's say, in the digital industry. Okay. The problems associated with the digital industry, true, have a competition element. You get a whole bunch of data. What is this data is acquired over years? Is there an ability or need to share this data? Is that, is the data an essential facility? Competition laws all over the world differ on essential facilities. There's really no such thing in the US, even though the term originated there. In Europe, it's more limited than most people believe it to be. Now, the problem is that, say, the whole idea is, what is the problem? Okay. When we look at, let's say, the digital industry, the big online marketplaces, Google or something, I understand you don't have an Amazon problem of the Amazon industry here, other than the big retailer, but we have that in North America and in the EU. What is the problem there? Okay, so we start seeing a competition problem of self-preferencing. And we think, and that's where, for instance, an online platform like Google prefers its own clients or its own Google shops to other retail establishments. Is that necessarily bad? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. There are whole arguments about advantages of vertical integration and so on and so forth. So there are some competition issues there. There are also some data acquisitions and data uses there. It is the former, the competition issues related to the vertical integration elements and the like. Yes, that's something competition agencies are really looking at. To deal with the data that involves developing a new set of skills, is that appropriate for competition agencies to deal with? Answer is perhaps. In the UK, you can look, we have a digital markets unit in the CMA. It's just developed. They passed the law, but unfortunately, even though the law authorizing this branch was passed, you need resources. So without that, it's just really hand-waving. Competition agencies can't do anything. Are we likely to get the right responses? Well, what's the problem? We need to, I think that's the clear thing. We see Google, Amazon, whatever. These are Facebook. These are big, therefore bad. So we make that inference. Is that really a problem? Big is often, at least in the US, is the reward for successful. We, in fact, see in the whole arguments about self-preferencing, these arguments repeat probably, well, it's the same arguments made, and I don't think the people making the new arguments look at the old arguments. And these old arguments were made in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, where we had big department stores coming in. How big department stores were bad. Big department stores, as we know, aren't necessarily bad. Okay, in fact, they improve consumers' lives. So we're seeing the same arguments now raised against Google as were being that were raised in the 30s, 40s, and 50s against luxury department stores. We know that didn't work. So I think when we step outside of as competition policymakers, lawyers, and experts, when we step outside analysis of market failure due to monopolies and into other areas, I think we have to be cautious. We can't assume immediately that this is a competition problem, and more importantly, B, that a competition solution is the adequate solution. We need, and the key thing is we may not have the expertise. We need to find those with the expertise, or we need to develop the expertise to get a solution to the problems. Okay, and that's my 2 cents, to use that phrase.
Thank you.
So first of all, thank you so much, Vicente, for putting this event together. For me, it's an honor being here among professionals that I truly follow and admire. So for me, it's an honor to have the opportunity to discuss a little bit this wonderful group that you presented. And my research agenda is usually towards a sociological approach. And I believe you have a very strong sociological claim in your book. In the sense that I think you pointed out very clearly now that competition law cannot solve all crises, and perhaps the fact is that competition system only observes the problems through a competition analysis, right? So in this sense, I don't think it's a proper question, but more a comment. Is the nature of the crisis something important when we start to discuss what are the mechanisms that the system can present for us? So we are talking about environmental crisis, we are talking about financial crisis, we are talking about health crisis. So different kind of crisis that in competition terms is translated to different problems, right? So in this sense, in sociological terms, this is an increase of complexity of the operation of the agency towards the solution. So this would be the first comment. I believe in your book, in some ways, you claim this argument, right? So it matters to understand what is the nature of crisis. We want to understand if it's possible or not to have a proper solution by the competition agency. And the second question is towards the chicken of tomorrow case, because you also said that despite the fact that there's limitations towards the competition answer regarding the crisis, there's an important perspective that the agency put out very clear what are the guidance or what are the possibilities for the market. So the second comment I would like to hear a little bit is even though there's limitations towards what a competition agency could present as a solution, there is a necessary or a mandatory perspective that the agency puts very clearly to the public that it's not his or the structure responsibility in doing that and pointing out what is a competition problem in that crisis and what is not, right? This would be my second comment. And finally, just a third comment. You mentioned the COVID case, and this also is a very big discussion here in Brazil. And you mentioned the situation that you were in the taxi and you heard the announcement of the pharmaceutical company saying, in some kind of ways, a misleading news, or I could say, a fake news, we could probably say. So would you agree that fake news or misleading news is a kind of market barrier that is very serious today? So these 3 comments.
Okay, first comment, crisis, competition can't solve everything. So that's fair. When we're faced with these crises, I mean, these crises were, they all involve market shocks in the sense of increase in demand or decrease in demand, et cetera. Okay, what was the cause of all of this? Okay. And that's where we should, when we're looking at addressing a crisis, whether it's a public health crisis, whether it's a economic crisis occasioned by a public health crisis or occasioned by something else, we need to look at the cause. Okay, we need to figure out how we can eradicate that cause, or if, for instance, the cause has been is the result of some historical antecedents such as over-subsidization in the beef industry. We know, let's try not to repeat it again. Okay, but then we need to look at, okay, how can we mitigate the consequences that are caused? Now, in my mind, and this is, I think, the theme of today, the theme of the book is competition deals with market failure of monopoly. So as competition lawyers, we have to ask ourselves, would adding more monopoly be a solution? The answer, I think, is almost always no. I say almost always because there's probably a counterexample out there. Okay? So we as competition lawyers cannot address every problem. Okay, and we need to disabuse ourselves of that. The real problem with people with an area of expertise is there's a North American saying, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Yeah, you use the hammer to pound it in, whether it's a screw, whether it's a nail, whether it's a hook, or whatever. To a competition lawyer, and in a lot of cases, everything looks like a competition problem. It's not. We need to disabuse ourselves of that. Competition cannot solve the problems. Competition can work with other disciplines, with other legal and policy areas to show how anti-competitive solutions to the problems can be developed, or to show how a proposed solution is or isn't anti-competitive. Okay. So that's what we need. We have some limited focus. We are not the savers of the world. The second guidance is important. We really need to have guidance. Okay, that I think is the key lesson. Without guidance, we don't know how to act. We know that in some cases, cooperation can resolve. We know in most cases, cooperation is going to be bad, particularly if we look at the industries. Okay, the industries say cooperation because they want to profit. We want to say cooperation because we want a successful vaccine. Okay, competition agencies can, I think, make beneficial cooperation a lot easier by mitigating or eliminating the risk. By saying, no, we will not, we accept this agreement, we will not get legal if you adhere to this agreement. Okay? And that's where we need, where the focus ought to be. Or a focus ought to be, and the focus is assisting in picking down barriers and such. Fake news and market barriers. Fake news is a problem. It's not, it acts as a market barrier. It can act as false advertising. And a lot of competition authorities wear two hats. consumer protection hats as well as a market protection hats. Fake news definitely falls in the consumer protection hats. You see, in the UK, our Competition and Marketing Authority has issued guidances on greenwashing. In other words, false claims, i.e. fake news, about environmental benefits of certain arrangements or certain products and the like, and that they're going to take this on as the consumer protections. I think that's the way to go. It's not necessarily a competition law problem. It doesn't deal with the core element of market failure. True, fake news can be used, as we saw in the example in taxi, to erect market barriers, but so can advertising, false claims be used. I think the way to attack it is to attack it with a consumer. We have well-developed, at least in the UK, a lot of regimes have very well-developed consumer protection regulations regarding these sorts of claims, and that's what we reflect in. It may be the case that the incentives for fake news, how should we say, outweigh the fines and the disincentives. If that's the case, that's an argument for increasing the penalties, increasing the prosecutions, better resourcing that behavior, the investigation of that behavior.
We have one last question from the floor, please.
First of all, Professor, it's an honor to have you here. So I have one question. Professor, how macroeconomics conditions can amplify market failures and yet so affect the balance of well-being of the markets? Because sometimes we see the shocks occurring in the markets and the players trying to survive and trying to constantly making more competitive and stay alive, like you said in previous period in COVID and 2020.
Yeah, okay. These market shocks can have redistributive effects. If you are a drugstore or department store with a large supply of hand gel prior to COVID, you could raise your prices up. Of course, okay. The other problem we saw an increase in sudden shocks. Just businesses staying alive is when there's a temporary demand, a temporary drop in demand. Okay, we saw that in the restaurant industry, as a clear case, travel industry and life. This is ultimately a political choice. Okay, governments can do one of two things. Governments can say, well, that's the market, that's tough, and they might condemn a lot of small business owners and their employees to bankruptcy and unemployment. Politically, that is a disaster. Okay. The other choice is to support the economy, to hand out means of bridging the gap between, because we hope that the, how should we say, the demand drop is temporary. Okay. And again, that involves a redistributive effect, shifting around tax money to support this. Politically, it's a much wiser choice. It was opted, I think, in most countries. But again, it has led to demand people holding savings. And there's some winners there that quite honestly made profits that in wartime would be viewed as more profits. Is this a competition problem? Not really. This is a political distributive problem of distributive justice. Is it, are competition lawyers experts in distributive justice? Probably not. Probably not. Who are the experts in distributive justice? Do we have any? Or are those really sort of in a democratic society, something that we have in the population? So, so these are issues I think that are appropriate, but we're to address, but again, I think extend outside of the competition. As you've noticed, I take a very narrow view about what competition law should be doing. Okay, I don't believe in expanding it because in my toolbox, I not only have a hammer, but I've got a screwdriver and pliers. So I see there's many tools to a solution. Many tools to provide a solution.
Ok. Vou ter que sempre para outra parte, senão a gente talvez não tenha tempo. We have another part of the conference, and then if you have time, we'll come back for other questions, okay? Next part of this event is competition law classes. Okay? This is related. This is related with the research that was conducted by IBRAC Jr. Going to the law schools to verify if they are teaching competition law. Professor Juliana mentioned a reality that she faces in a big state, Brazil, okay? And they don't know, people there, they don't know competition law. But it's a problem that you can face here in São Paulo and in other parts of Brazil. And I'm proud that Mackenzie is one of the first law schools to have as mandatory competition law for all students. In a part of the book, Professor Bruce, you wrote, market societies can be viewed as possessing two different elements, a system by which wealth is created and another system by which wealth is redistributed. The former is created through the market, and the latter is through a tax and transfer regime. The social goal of competition law is to increase surplus and reduce deadweight loss. In other words, to allow the market to grow wealth via the elimination of market's failures associated with monopoly. Maybe if we started to teach competition law, people will really understand the meaning of a free market, the benefits of the market, and the wealth that is generated in a market that works in free competition. So I would like to invite J.uvenal and Maria Paula Pereira from IBRAC Jr. to present the benchmarking of the IBRAC Jr. conduct.
Bom dia a todos. Thank you, Professor Bruce. Gostaria de agradecer em nome do IBRAC Jr. e do IBRAC a oportunidade de, nesse último dia de encerramento da Semana da Concorrência, abordarmos uma pesquisa que foi feita com alunos de todo o Brasil para falar a impressão e o interesse deles sobre o direito da concorrência. Inclusive, abordando como os professores poderiam contribuir para a implementação desse curso que é tão importante para todos nós dentro das universidades. A iniciativa do benchmarking foi realmente propor com o objetivo de entender como os alunos viam o direito da concorrência, se existia o direito da concorrência dentro da sala de aula e como os professores poderiam implementar e entender o direito da concorrência aproximando ao aluno.
Para isso, nós utilizamos duas frentes, uma com os alunos e uma com os professores, e a metodologia utilizada foi um formulário anônimo, via Google, compartilhado os espaços de interesses dos alunos, como grupos de sala, Facebook, e com os professores nós realizamos entrevistas que foram tanto presenciais, quanto alguns preferiram responder via formulário também.
Na etapa 1 dos estudantes, nós traçamos um perfil de como aqueles participantes da pesquisa entendiam o direito da concorrência. Já com os resultados aferidos, nós conseguimos traçar esse perfil, entender as demandas dos estudantes e conseguir alguns feedbacks para que o direito da concorrência estivesse mais próximo tanto da academia, quanto do mercado de trabalho, quanto dos próprios alunos.
Passando a etapa com os professores, nós fizemos novamente um perfil dos professores de lecionamento e de como eles estão aplicando as disciplinas que eles atualmente lecionam. E, a partir dessas experiências, nós propusemos algumas reflexões sobre os desafios para a realização da incorporação de uma matéria de direito concorrencial nas grades curriculares.
Bom, a primeira etapa dos alunos foi exatamente a questão do perfil. No formulário dos estudantes, nós recebemos 116 respostas de estudantes de todo o país e cerca de 91,4% eram estudantes que estavam atualmente na graduação. Desses estudantes, um número relevante que me chamou a atenção foi que a maioria dos respondentes estava no 5º semestre, ou seja, exatamente no meio da graduação. Através das respostas, nós conseguimos traçar também um perfil nacional. Mesmo que a maioria das contribuições tenha sido feita em São Paulo, principalmente na região sudeste, nós percebemos que muitos estudantes fora desse eixo Brasília-São Paulo, que habitualmente está relacionado ao direito da concorrência, tiveram interesse de responder à pesquisa. Em segundo lugar, na nossa pesquisa, ficou a região Nordeste, muito em relação a novas iniciativas como o IA, que traz esse empoderamento feminino para fora do eixo, e também o ANDI, que é uma associação que está sendo criada atualmente, que fala do Norte e Nordeste, e Direito Econômico. Aqui nós traçamos as principais universidades que responderam à pesquisa por região. No Norte, nós tivemos a influência da Federal do Pará. No Nordeste, nós tivemos a Faculdade Baiana de Direito e Gestão. E no Centro-Oeste, tivemos o IDP. No Sudeste, tivemos o USP, que também foi interessante, porque é um curso muito novo de Direito, se comparado às outras universidades que responderam à pesquisa. E no Sul, tivemos a Unicinos, que também foi uma surpresa, tendo em vista onde a gente consideraria que o direito da concorrência estava chegando. Então, foi muito importante os nossos resultados seguintes. Aqui, 67,2% dos participantes indicaram que nas instituições de ensino não ofereciam nenhuma disciplina que abordava o direito da concorrência, nem diretamente, nem indiretamente.
E agora, a partir desse perfil traçado dos estudantes que responderam à nossa pesquisa, nós passamos as perguntas mais diretas aos estudantes que não têm uma disciplina de concorrencial na sua grade, que foi a maioria, e pegamos alguns feedbacks dos alunos que já têm uma matéria ou, enfim, já cursaram. Então, primeiramente, para a aferição de interesse, nós queríamos identificar o quão os estudantes da nossa pesquisa tiveram contato prévio com o tema. É muito interessante que a professora Juliana até mencionou isso. Mesmo em universidades do eixo, uma quantidade considerável dos alunos, mais da metade, nunca tiveram contato prévio com o tema. Dos participantes que responderam que tiveram algum contato, a maior incidência de meios de contato foi justamente a pesquisa acadêmica, individualmente feita, por meio de webinars do Cade, do IBRAC, e pela experiência profissional, seja pelo estágio ou pelo Cade, que justamente traz uma oportunidade para diversos estudantes, e também estudantes fora do eixo, de passarem no Cade e conhecerem o dia a dia da autarquia na prática. No total de participantes, 78,1% responderam que acham relevante ou extremamente relevante o ensino de direito à concorrência nas universidades, considerando aqui aqueles que já têm e aqueles que não têm. E 94,1%, que é um número muito expressivo, indica que tem interesse da inclusão de uma disciplina, seja letiva, seja obrigatória, na sua grade curricular da matéria. E aqui, passando ao feedback, os estudantes que já possuem uma disciplina em sua grade, 56,5% responderam que essa disciplina é uma obrigatória e 39,5% trouxeram que ela é oferecida no 5º semestre, ou seja, ali no meio da graduação. 65% dos respondentes indicaram que estão satisfeitos ou muito satisfeitos com a disciplina oferecida. Mas justamente pensando em melhorias das disciplinas que nós já temos atualmente, pedimos algumas sugestões para os estudantes que tinham interesse, então nós tivemos exatamente 14 respostas, mas foi muito interessante notar que com essas 14 respostas conseguimos identificar 3 temas principais. Primeiramente, uma constante foi a solicitação de que essa matéria de Direito à Concorrência fosse independente. Como essas respostas eram mais qualitativas, aqui eu até posso fazer alguns comentários, muitos estudantes mencionaram que, olha, é uma matéria que está junto de Direito Econômico, ou eu tenho alguma palhinha em outra disciplina não tão relacionada, e eu queria ter uma matéria independente, uma matéria focada em Direito da Concorrência. Outro ponto que foi trazido é a adoção de um modelo híbrido, aliando aulas práticas e aulas teóricas, ou seja, aulas que tragam um pouco mais do dia a dia, Cade, o que a gente vê de casos novos, etc. E esse foi um ponto interessante, porque ele foi trazido tanto como um aspecto de quero sugerir essa melhoria, como um aspecto de, nossa, as minhas aulas são assim e eu acho incrível e gostaria de ressaltar isso. E o último ponto foi das 14 respostas, 13 respostas mencionavam isso, que é oferecer a disciplina no meio do curso. Porque alguns estudantes citaram que, olha, a disciplina focada em direito concorrencial é dada no final da grade, no 8º, 9º, 10º semestre. Semestres que os estudantes naturalmente estão mais focados em TCC, trabalho, OAB, e muitas vezes eles não conseguem se dedicar a explorar caminhos novos como o direito concorrencial.
Partindo para a etapa 2, sobre os professores, nós também traçamos um perfil e também analisamos como as disciplinas estão sendo aplicadas atualmente. No perfil dos professores, nós percebemos que, no mínimo, 10 anos a 20 anos de experiência é classificada dentro desse grupo de professores que responderam à entrevista, o que mostrou um vasto conhecimento, tanto histórico quanto prático, da disciplina de Direito da Concorrência. Também notamos que os professores, ao responderem, disseram que a disciplina era oferecida ou anualmente, uma vez ao ano, ou num ciclo de 2 anos, o que chamou também a nossa atenção, se caberia que essa disciplina fosse lecionada mais vezes, ou para mais estudantes, porque, às vezes, como eletiva, essa disciplina ela é dada em um ciclo de 2 anos, e, às vezes, o estudante não tem a oportunidade de cursá-la. Na resposta dos professores, de 7, 6 responderam que, no mínimo, 3 professores qualificados poderiam dar essa disciplina na sua universidade, o que demonstra a capacidade da universidade em absorver essa matéria e implementá-la, seja obrigatória ou eletiva. Só que um red flag que também apareceu nessa pergunta foi a questão de nomes de professores que poderiam realizar essa disciplina. E, ao mencionar os professores, percebemos que apenas 20% foram nomes de mulheres, o que demonstra realmente preocupante no cenário, no sentido de inclusão e diversidade do corpo acadêmico. E também gostaríamos até de mencionar que existem outras iniciativas, como o próprio BIA, que possuem um grupo de mulheres realmente qualificado para trazer essa disciplina em sala de aula. Assim, a maioria dos entrevistados também esclareceu como temas do direito da concorrência está incluído na sua grade, mas de forma correlata, seja por meio do direito econômico ou matérias que envolvam esse tema, direito do consumidor, direito comercial, entre outros. E que há o oferecimento de eletivas para que o aluno se interesse e possa buscar um aprofundamento na matéria. Com o passar das perguntas, nós fizemos perguntas mais específicas sobre como essa matéria era implementada nas universidades. E conseguimos fazer 2 fluxos diferentes de implementação. O primeiro fluxo foi relacionado a uma parte mais clássica do início da implementação do direito da concorrência, nos anos 90, que foi uma retomada no sentido dos professores que eram ex-membros ou ainda eram membros conselheiros do Cade. Já o segundo fluxo, mais atual, era relacionado a um corpo docente que tinha um pensamento mais instrumental introdutório para entender o mercado da concorrência e voltar o aluno para o mercado de trabalho. Na mesma linha, não só da implementação, mas da continuidade da matéria, percebemos que um primeiro modelo seria mais tradicional, com um aspecto voltado ao histórico, o foco em concursos e a matéria ser disponibilizada nesse modelo a demandar do corpo docente. Então, partia mais de uma iniciativa do próprio professor. Já o segundo modelo é um modelo que faz uma abordagem mercadológica, com a adoção de grupos de estudo, promoção de estudos, pesquisas e eventos para diferenciar do modelo já tradicional. Geralmente, nós percebemos que, nas respostas que é um modelo aplicado por universidades que tem um aspecto mais voltado à tecnologia e inovação. Alguns dados gerais das disciplinas, quando conversado com os professores em entrevista ou formulário, foi a sugestão de ideias que pudessem elaborar e implementar um melhor modelo para os alunos, para que esses tivessem mais interesse em cursar a disciplina. Ou aquelas universidades que não tivessem essa disciplina pudessem implementar, como se fosse o meio do caminho. Aqui algumas características e sugestões dos docentes. Nesse momento, quando os professores falavam sobre eletivas, eles nos relataram que quando havia o oferecimento dessa disciplina, geralmente eram de 20 a 30 vagas, só que elas raramente eram completas, E aqui surgiu um questionamento, quando avaliamos os dados em relação aos alunos. Por que os alunos não procuravam essa eletiva? E nós chegamos à conclusão, por meio das entrevistas de ambos os grupos, que não havia um desinteresse, mas sim uma adequação à grade, uma falta de publicidade da disciplina e até mesmo a falta de conhecimento por parte do corpo discente. Sobre o oferecimento, nessa parte, tanto as disciplinas como eletivas e também obrigatórias, foi importante mencionar os alunos nesse ponto, porque os professores entendem que a matéria deveria ser aplicada no 4º e 5º anos, por conta da maturidade necessária para o estudo, que vai em desalinho com o que os estudantes preferem, que é ter essa matéria no meio do curso. Isso porque, como a Maria já mencionou, o 4º e 5º ano existe uma preocupação com outras demandas, seja do mercado de trabalho, seja OAB, até mesmo concurso público, para aqueles alunos que queiram seguir essa área. Então, esse desencontro talvez prejudique no momento de alinhamento da implementação da matéria. Aqui, nós buscamos entender quais matérias seriam importantes para se ter o direito da concorrência de forma basilar e qual seria a predileção de temas dos alunos com base no que os professores entendem ser importante. E, na visão dos discentes, também haveria essa separação novamente de um modelo mais clássico, tratar a parte histórica e econômica do direito da concorrência, e a parte mais prática, que é sobre a aplicação da lei a casos concretos. A predileção dos alunos, a gente entende que é pertinente e realmente está alinhada com o mercado de trabalho, sendo economia digital, controle de condutas e acordo de leniência, inclusive que são temas que abordamos durante essa Semana da Concorrência. As disciplinas basilares, como penal, civil, societário, economia, administrativa e constitucional, são disciplinas que os professores citaram que seriam interessantes para terem anteriormente ao direito da concorrência, mas não de modo obrigatório. Já para a difusão da concorrência, além da sala de aula, entendemos que seria interessante os professores abordarem outros aspectos, para que os alunos se sentissem estimulados, além de estudar o direito da concorrência, também exercê-lo fora da sala de aula. E os professores sugeriram eventos e a produção acadêmica. Com relação aos eventos, nós revisitamos o que os professores responderam e eles colocaram que existia uma dificuldade em relação aos eventos externos, que era a divulgação. No momento de divulgação, a maioria dos eventos externos era divulgado pelos professores e não havia essa cultura institucional da própria faculdade, universidade, oferecer essa divulgação dos eventos e promover junto aos discentes. Já os eventos internos foram levantados 3 aspectos pelos professores: a ausência de recursos para convidar palestrantes fora do eixo, e aqui, além da falta de recursos, seria até o recurso de conhecimento de outras pessoas fora do eixo. A existência de outros eventos, geralmente os eventos de concorrência, na visão dos professores, têm alguma correlação de período, o que dificulta eventos isolados, e o baixo quórum dos alunos. E, novamente, trazemos o questionamento acerca do porquê os alunos não estão participando desses eventos. Em relação à produção acadêmica, os professores falaram que existe esse incentivo à produção acadêmica, mas a maioria é um incentivo externo, seja pelo Cade, pelo IA ou pelo próprio IBRAC. Mas, dentro das instituições, existe a iniciação científica e os TCCs, que também foram citados nas nossas respostas. Já sobre as lacunas encontradas em relação a esse ponto de interesse do estudante versus disponibilidade do docente, os docentes entenderam que realmente existia essa lacuna da interface do direito da concorrência, ou seja, relacionar o direito da concorrência com outra matéria, seja o direito penal, o direito do consumidor, civil, entre outros. E com essa possível implementação de interdisciplinaridade trazida pelo direito da concorrência, os alunos poderiam olhar o direito da concorrência com olhos mais positivos e entendendo que não era um bicho de 7 cabeças. Já em relação à lacuna da produção acadêmica, os professores trouxeram que existe realmente essa dificuldade, porque isso é uma disciplina específica e que os alunos entendem por diversas vezes inalcançáveis. Então, quando as pessoas entram em contato com o direito da concorrência, elas acreditam que elas não vão conseguir estudar aquela temática por conta da economia, por ser um mercado específico, ou a questão de ver na matéria um aspecto mais elitista. E os professores entenderam também que essa preocupação se daria também por conta da falta de interação. Então, por isso é necessário incentivar também o aspecto de fora de aula, seja por grupos de estudos, por núcleos, entre outras atividades.
A partir desse quadro geral que nós vamos vendo de percepções dos professores e retomando novamente o feedback dos alunos, e aqui essa parte vai até ficar um pouquinho repetida, porque a Rebeca já conseguiu adiantar alguns temas aqui, mas a gente vai ressaltar isso para justamente propor no final algumas sugestões para o enfrentamento desses desafios. Então, ressaltando aqui, primeiramente, gostaríamos de destacar quais são os benefícios da inclusão de uma disciplina de direito concorrencial. Então, primeiramente, muitos professores trouxeram a questão da exposição prática do raciocínio jurídico, ou seja, além do conteúdo, trazer direito concorrencial é importante para que o aluno aprenda a aliar as diversas temáticas do direito para poder compreender a matéria. Então, isso forma o pensamento jurídico e permite que ele faça essas interconexões que vão ser tão necessárias na sua vida prática profissional. A própria interdisciplinaridade é interessante também, não só para que você consiga usar, mas para que você tenha outras ferramentas para utilizar, como, por exemplo, as ferramentas econômicas. E outro ponto muito relevante trazido é a oportunidade de desenvolvimento individual do aluno, porque, justamente pela dinamicidade da disciplina, ao lecionar, você consegue explorar no estudante outras características além do conteúdo técnico, como o estímulo ao trabalho em equipe, a cooperação, como fazer pesquisa de jurisprudência, analisar notícias da mídia, enfim, ferramentas que não são necessariamente ligadas ao conhecimento técnico, mas que são muito importantes na formação de um aluno. Alguns fatores atrativos, então, com base nesses benefícios, é justamente a dinamicidade, porque muitos estudantes trazem esse feedback positivo após terem uma experiência de aula de direito concorrencial. É interessante que muitos estudantes vêm até a matéria justamente por poder identificar na mídia os grandes casos emblemáticos e eles possam, com o ferramental aprendido nas aulas, tanto analisar esses casos como ir atrás de outros. E, novamente, a relação interdisciplinar, que é muito importante para o ensino jurídico no nosso país. Agora, pensando aqui, além dos benefícios, quais são os fatores desestimulantes? Primeiramente, a falta de oportunidades. Muitas vezes, a própria existência ou não de uma disciplina na universidade E mesmo com oferecimento, como nós vimos as questões de baixo quórum, você tem entraves como encaixe de horário na grade, às vezes uma disciplina dada à tarde ou um período não tão favorável. Nós recebemos feedbacks de alunos também relativos aos créditos oferecidos pela matéria, ou seja, o quanto isso vai aí para a pontuação final da sua grade, para que ele se forme. Tem essa certa ideia também de que o tema é elitizado, que ele é extremamente sofisticado, muito nichado, que o aluno não vai conseguir, ou vai ter que fazer um esforço muito grande para conseguir acompanhar as aulas. Pelo desconhecimento de alguns alunos sobre o tema, e como nós vimos, é uma porcentagem alta, muitos também não percebem a relevância social, porque identificam que esses temas, às vezes, estão muito longe da sua realidade, e ele não consegue ver os efeitos práticos. O estudo de outras ferramentas, que pode ser atrativo para uns, também pode ser considerado algo negativo para outros, principalmente quando os alunos porventura entendem que essa necessidade de estudar outras ferramentas pode ser um impeditivo. E o outro ponto, muito trazido pelos professores, é essa aparente ideia de que o mercado de trabalho para o direito concorrencial é muito limitado. Então, um aluno ali já buscando, pensando na sua carreira, seja pública, seja privada, não entende como se encaixar dentro do direito concorrencial, mesmo tendo interesse na matéria, acaba não indo atrás porque entende que não vai ser um mercado que ele vai conseguir entrar. Então, com base nesses aspectos, nós mapeamos, então, como os desafios. Primeiramente, a necessidade de sopesar grades curriculares que já são muito extensas, já que o direito tem um leque de temas, e, ao mesmo tempo, você oferecer ao aluno uma ampla oferta de possibilidades para que ele possa escolher ali livremente e personalizar a sua grade conforme os seus interesses pessoais. E, a partir desse problema, você acaba tendo outros desafios decorrentes. Primeiro é a variedade, porque se você diz que eu quero privilegiar um modelo que tenha eletivas e que o aluno personalize sua grade, é importante que você ofereça disciplinas que abordam com maior profundidade a lei da concorrência, de preferência com uma regularidade maior, para que mais alunos consigam ali encaixar na sua grade, bem como é interessante que você explore em outras disciplinas eletivas, talvez mais específicas, sei lá, como mercados digitais, que foi citado aqui hoje, essas interfaces. Além disso, nós percebemos que a inexistência de outros métodos de difusão do tema em algumas universidades também é um desafio que abrange todos os problemas para a implementação. Por quê? Porque esses meios alternativos de difusão, como grupos de estudo, é essencial para garantir o interesse dos alunos nas disciplinas. Então, às vezes, é um primeiro contato até antes da sala de aula, não só participando do grupo, mas olhando postagens, muitas vezes grupos são mais ativos na rede social, compartilhando notícias, e isso vai fazendo com que os alunos conheçam o tema, mas também grupos de estudo, clínicas de direito concorrencial, elas permitem que, após a matéria, beleza, fiz a letiva, eu consiga me aprofundar nesse tema sem ficar dependente todo o tempo ali de ter uma aula e de ter professores alocados para isso. E, novamente, torna-se um desafio fazer uma aproximação com o mercado de trabalho, porque diante dessa problemática de que os alunos não têm conhecimento de quais são as oportunidades que ele pode ter para ingressar na área, além do conteúdo, você tem que divulgar, você precisa apresentar as oportunidades existentes, seja no privado, seja no público, e também incentivar carreiras acadêmicas para fazer com que esses alunos não abandonem esse interesse simplesmente porque não vejo como trabalhar com isso. Então, devido à natureza desses desafios, ficou claro para o nosso grupo que o enfrentamento dessas questões exige a atuação conjunta, não só das universidades, mas de organizações como o IBRAC, está tendo iniciativas como essa aqui, da Semana da Concorrência, dos escritórios de advocacia e até mesmo do próprio Cade. Então, nós gostaríamos de propor aqui, como nós vamos coordenar esses esforços desses entes de uma forma efetiva, para que nós podemos resolver esses problemas com cada um ali auxiliando no que melhor lhe cabe. E aqui nós trouxemos 5 sugestões iniciais.
Bom, sobre o oferecimento amplo de eletivas. Como nós falamos, poucas universidades oferecem um curso de forma obrigatória, e muitos dos professores também falaram sobre esse ponto, que não haveria um cabimento sobre oferecer essa matéria de modo obrigatório, tendo em vista o amplo número de matérias já existentes na grade. Mas o oferecimento de eletivas seria uma solução para que todos os alunos tivessem contato com o direito da concorrência, independente do ano do curso.
Outro ponto nisso também justamente pela interdisciplinaridade que a gente combinou aqui na apresentação e falando sobre a variedade, essas eletivas normalmente não precisam só se restringir a direito concorrencial. Um feedback muito interessante que nós tivemos de alguns alunos foi de uma disciplina que eles falaram que estava sendo implementada na sua grade, ou seja, eles não têm a matéria, mas que eles estavam super ansiosos porque eles entendiam que a discussão na sala ia ser muito proveitosa para algumas matérias que eles tiveram antes de economia. Então, dentro da grade de direito, ele tinha fundamentos de microeconomia, micro, macro, e nós entendemos que oferecer essas eletivas dentro da faculdade de direito também é interessante para promover um ferramental para que os alunos, quando forem analisar o direito da concorrência, não fiquem só na perspectiva jurídica e já tenham ali uma ideia das outras metodologias, das outras ciências que nós estamos para praticar o direito da concorrência.
Bom, a segunda e a terceira iniciativa são relacionadas a fora da sala de aula. Então, incentiva a criação de mais grupos de estudo que abordem diversos temas e a promoção de pesquisa acadêmica. Além disso, também foi sugerido que houvesse a criação de uma clínica jurídica da concorrência, entendendo que os alunos poderiam ali estudar esse caso, poderiam se aprofundar mais no tema, e entender também que, quando for realizado eventos, não só de direito da concorrência, de modo específico, mas também eventos de interdisciplinaridade, entendendo que o direito da concorrência, por ser um tema quase guarda-chuva, abarcaria diversos assuntos.
Ainda em eventos, além da promoção de eventos, que muitas vezes acaba sendo por esses grupos de estudo, nós gostaríamos de incentivar uma cultura institucional de divulgar os eventos que tem. O IBRAC, o próprio Cade, sempre oferecem diversos webinars e oportunidades para que os alunos ali do YouTube consigam ter os novos desenvolvimentos da área, consigam ver discussões tão importantes como o que está acontecendo aqui hoje, e, enfim, isso possa ser algo mais institucionalizado, porque alguns feedbacks dos professores trouxeram que isso acaba dependendo muito do quão ativo o professor é ou não nesses eventos, nessas questões, então é interessante trazer isso tanto pelos grupos de estudo quanto dentro da sala de aula. Outro ponto muito importante é a aproximação dos escritórios às organizações do IBRAC e às universidades. Nós pensamos aqui, jogando por alto, vários métodos, várias oportunidades que parcerias podem promover uma maior difusão dos temas de direito da concorrência. A Semana da Concorrência já está sendo uma. Outro exemplo que nós pensamos geralmente todas as universidades têm ali feira de estágio, feira dos estudantes, algumas nessas feiras têm palestras e apresentações sobre a área, então, sobre o escritório, no caso. Então, por que não aproveitar essas oportunidades em que o escritório, por exemplo, está se apresentando e você já emenda ali com uma aula magna sobre o tema? Qual é a prática do direito concorrencial advogando, por exemplo? Muitas vezes, na sala de aula, você não faz a conexão de qual é o trabalho prático do advogado. Então, é interessante promover esses eventos complementares para que você consiga atingir diferentes pontos da graduação. Então, um aluno do primeiro semestre, um calouro, já consegue ali ter uma palhinha do que é direito da concorrência e guardar aquilo na mente, e quando chegar a hora, ele escolhe essa optativa, ou no segundo, terceiro ano, enfim. Também a promoção de cursos de verão, acho que isso foi um dos feedbacks trazidos pelos professores, de universidades que promovem cursos de verão com parceria com instituições, com parceria com escritórios para os alunos. Então, aí, durante as férias, os alunos que têm mais interesse podem ali cursar e ter mais conhecimentos além do da sala de aula, e isso já também se correlaciona diretamente com a inclusão da abordagem sobre o mercado de trabalho na grade. Acaba sendo muito importante, já que esse déficit foi identificado, e aqui nós gostaríamos de ressaltar, é importante trazer essa abordagem não só no privado, não só na advocacia, mas também no direito público, seja pelo Cade, com oportunidade de concluir em Cade, ou trabalhar futuramente no Cade, mas existem outras carreiras públicas, como especialista de políticas públicas, que o ferramental do direito da concorrência é muito interessante, muito importante para a sua prática na área, não só ali na hora do concurso. E muitos alunos não têm a percepção de como utilizar o direito da concorrência, até mesmo nessas carreiras públicas. Isso é algo importante, porque não é tão difundido. Inclusive, ainda falando sobre o mercado de trabalho, nós pensamos aqui, isso é um desafio, muitas vezes, para quem está fora do eixo, já de que a maior parte dos escritórios está em São Paulo, trabalhar com Cade, você vai estar em Brasília. Mas a gente teve a experiência da pandemia aí que trouxe o teletrabalho, então isso é um ponto importante para as faculdades que estão fora do eixo, muitas que não têm matéria de direito concorrencial, e para que nós possam abordar isso com seus alunos. Você pode estar aqui no Nordeste, no Norte, e ainda assim tentar pleitear uma vaga de escritório, ou até o próprio Cade tem algumas vagas com regime de teletrabalho, e se inserir na área através do home office. Essas foram algumas das sugestões que a gente trouxe aqui, mas seria muito importante, se vocês quisessem contribuir, discutir um pouco, ver o que acham dessas ideias iniciais. São apenas algumas proposições para que a gente possa pensar em como enfrentar esses desafios, mas não tem resposta fácil. Então, fiquem à vontade.
Pessoal, mais uma vez, eu gostaria de agradecer em nome do IBRAC Jr e do IBRAC. Esse benchmarking, ele vai estar disponibilizado posteriormente para vocês, mas como a Maria Paula falou, é uma coisa que a gente está construindo agora e nós queremos construir juntos. Então, todos são bem-vindos para a propositura de novas ideias, novas opções, em nome do direito da concorrência, para que a gente possa desenvolver a cada dia mais esse tema. E aqui está o nosso time, vou falar rapidamente o nome de todos, que ajudaram para que esse evento, essa semana, acontecesse. A Ana Binotto, Catarina Cordão, Ellen Delter, Henrique Santana, Isabela Panúcio, Jéssica Costa, Leonardo Giochini, Luiz Jaric, Marcela Carvalho, Maria Andrade, Nicolas Cosman, Rebeca Juvenal e Thales Neves. Muito obrigada a todos.
Evan, that is mentioned there, Rebecca, they are former students of Mackenzie, and nowadays they are working in the competition field. So I'm very happy with that. A suggestion, and congratulating IBRAC Jr for the research, my suggestion, you should present this research to the Brazilian Bar Association, because once competition law became an issue to the bar exam, all the faculties of law will feel obliged to teach competition law to their students. Considering the time, and that I don't want to compete with lunchtime, that's unfair competition, I would like to, first of all, to thank all the audience for you that are here in presence, for those that are following us in YouTube. A special thanks to Professor Bruce. It was a truly honor to have you here today, Mackenzie. And I would like to invite Marco, Juliana, Professor Bruce for their final remarks, and then René Medrado, in the name of IBRAC, to the closing remarks of this amazing event, amazing morning that we had together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicente, for organizing. I would like also to thank IBRAC. Fantastic event during the week. I think it's such a great initiative, Semana da Concorrência. Congratulations all the team that put effort, and especially this presentation. That's very important to understand what is the path that we have to promote in order to transform competition law in our country. I remember that during my undergraduation, I didn't have a competition subject. I studied at USP, and it was Cade, the program of an internship in Cade, that changed my mind and opened me to the competition law reality. So I think this kind of discussion is very important. So congratulations for this kind of work. Once again, it was a pleasure to discuss Bruce's book. It's such interesting perspectives about the future of competition law and the challenges regarding how to respond to the crisis. And perhaps, a law is always trying to make solution for crisis. So thanks God we have crisis also in order to have work. So this is also something interesting to comment. And finally, again, for me it was a pleasure having here such great professionals, René and Juliana. It's truly an honor. Thank you so much, Vicente.
I just want to thank you again for hosting me for this wonderful event. It's just capped an amazing week in São Paulo. I went on forever. It felt like this morning, so I have very few words to add to that. But I guess my only to sum everything up is that competition law is not the solution to every sort of crisis or problem, and we as a competition lawyers must recognize that. But it's also not as well as not being the solution to every problem, it's not the cause of every problem. Nor does it block problems from being solved. What it does block is it blocks problems that are being solved in a manner that harm the public. And I think that's a good point. So thanks again. Thanks for organizing a wonderful morning. And I'll shut up so that we can get to lunch sooner.
So thank you again, Professor Bruce. I think it was amazing for us, not only hear the main ideas from your book, but also to understand a little bit more the perspective that is also something that we are handling and trying to face now in Brazil after all the crisis and the new crisis that we have. we always have work, right? This is a good thing to say to the audience. So I would like to thank you, IBRAC. I will do it in your name, of course, but also in your names, because I think this kind of research is so important. Because first we have this photo, right, the picture related to the perspective of the students. Second, because it keeps inside all the professors, this fire to fight for more space for antitrust and competition. I had the opportunity in 2019 to share with some professors, just like Bill Kovacic, how antitrust was considered in our grade, and also in Brazil, how we teach antitrust, and it was something really impressive to see that we have so much space to fulfill. And I think this kind of event and the conference that we have, and also the work from WIA, so I'd like to thank you for mention here so many times. This organization is still a great project of my life. I used to say that is my third child, because I have two, two more. And I can see the movement. I can see it after, for example, the WCAD. That is also an idea that started inside WIA, and then Cade also liked the idea, and now we can see the law schools involvement, the professors, the students, and the groups, of course, are very important. 4 years ago, I changed it, and I did it with, lots of arguments at the University of São Paulo from the RIBEIRÁO unit. We had now antitrust as a regular forgot the word. Regular class, yes. But it's only in the end, right? It's in the 4th year, so you need to have this base, economics, and understand a little bit about the process and constitutional law. I think it's impossible to think about teaching antitrust before constitutional law, for example. But I think the ideas are very important to share with the other professors, and I think you mentioned something very important, involve the bar associations, and I think we can do it. It's important to do it. So thank you again. Thank you, Vicente, for organizing. Thank you, René, to share with us this work that you are doing. And thank you all that worked to show us this perfect research that, of course, we will, split for, we will do our job to share with our friends, to other professors, to our directors, to see what we can do to touch more students, to take care, and also to have inside the antitrust community. Thank you.
Well, first of all, President Bruno Drago from IBRAC, he is in Brazil, and then asked me to be here to close this full week of competition, Semana da Concorrência. There is a saying that Juliana, which is the Chief Attorney General of Cade, besides being a professor, she mentioned her 2 kids. And we know that to raise a kid, you need a trial. And I think for this week, it was possible to see that we took not only 5 law schools here in São Paulo, but also from different states. So on Monday, we had the Catholic school here in São Paulo, PUC, and the Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais. Also, we had on Tuesday, INSPER and Universidade de Brasília. On Wednesday, USP, a São Francisco, com o IDP e também a Universidade Federal do Paraná. Thursday, FGV São Paulo and FGV Rio de Janeiro. And today, Mackenzie, USP RIBEIRÁO e também a Universidade de Durham, aqui represented by Professor Bruce Wardhaugh. So I think it's a great sign that competition law is being spread, is being disseminated. It is a great sign to see that we had 300 people online throughout the week, and also 140 people attending these sessions. So I think this, and I don't think I get advance, of course, that the board of IBRAC will have to decide to do it or not, but I think it's not only the week of competition, but this should be the first week of competition. Certainly this should be repeated next year, and we already request also Professor Vicente the support of Mackenzie. Another note, very important to mention the work of IBRAC Jr. At some point we saw that this week would also give lots of work, and IBRAC has many activities. So we said, well, why don't we bring the young, energetic, and bright young attorneys that we have within IBRAC to help us organize. And we could see what happened. So thank you very much. Rebecca Juliana is here, present, Maria Paula Pereira who are here, Catarina Wardhaugh, also from IBRAC Jr. So, and all the names were mentioned already, so I thank you on behalf of the leadership of IBRAC for your work and for your dedication. Without much to say, I think we saw here actually it was an analysis of the relevant market for competition law course, probably a two-side market. So fantastic analysis, and we should not put it on the drawer. We should certainly use it and spread the word for the bar, for the OAB and other entities that may benefit from it. So with this, I think we can close. And yes, please.
Professor Juliana always has great ideas, and she is inviting everybody to join us here for a picture and to close the report for YouTube. Okay, so please join us here for a great picture.